Since the day he was born, Orion has always seen something no one else could: mysterious glowing orbs floating everywhere around town. Later in class, his teacher explains that mana is an energy that fills the entire world, and the ability to control it is what people call magic. It was originally developed as a survival tool to fight off monsters. The teacher continues the lesson, saying that anyone born with the right talent can use magic simply by reciting chants. Orion sits quietly in his seat, taking notes and listening to every word. As Orion watches the teacher demonstrate, he notices the glowing spheres in the air disappear whenever magic is used. Seeing this, he's pretty much convinced that these orbs are actually physical manifestations of mana. The teacher notices how focused Orion is and decides to put him on the spot. He calls Orion to the front of the room to try a practical application of the lesson. Before Orion can move, another student suddenly shoots his hand up and calls out to the teacher. It's a kid named Daniel, who has a smug look on his face. He tells the teacher it's a total waste of time to let Orion try because he doesn't have a lick of magical talent. A girl named Emily tries to step in and tell Daniel to knock it off, but he just gets defensive. He snaps at her, asking if she's really going to take Orion's side. Daniel turns back to Orion and starts pointing fingers. He tells him to stop acting like he's special by pretending to see things, claiming Orion is just desperate for attention. Orion looks pretty annoyed by the accusation. He calmly tells Daniel that he isn't trying to pull any stunts or get attention. Orion thinks back on his life, noting that seeing mana while having zero talent to use it has made things pretty difficult for him. While the other kids were busy practicing magic, he was just stuck in his own head. In a flashback, a man in a hood reaches out to comfort Orion. He tells the boy that he knows it's been a rough road for him up until now. Orion explains that this was the day he met the old man who would eventually become his teacher. He remembers looking closely at the man, who seemed to see right through him. The old man looks him in the eye and tells him he shouldn't hate the way he is or the eyes he was born with. As glowing orbs of mana float between them, the teacher tells Orion that one day, his unique vision is going to be something the whole world needs. The memory fades as Daniel starts screaming Orion's name at the top of his lungs. He points a finger right at Orion and tells him he's officially kicked out of the party. Orion is caught off guard and asks Daniel what's going on, reminding him that they've been working as a team for a long time. Daniel doesn't want to hear it and just screams at Orion to shut up, calling him a useless loser. Orion stands there in the doorway, totally confused, and asks what he means by calling him useless. Daniel just smirks and tells him he's nothing but dead weight to the group. He's actually surprised that Orion hasn't realized how much he's been dragging them down. Daniel keeps laying into Orion, mocking him for being part of a legendary hero's party while failing to master even the most basic magic. He tells Orion that the only reason he wasn't kicked out sooner was because they were childhood friends, so he should actually be grateful they kept him around this long. Orion doesn't argue because he knows the truth. He looks down, admitting to himself that his magic doesn't actually fit the standard requirements or work the way it's supposed to. Even with his flaws, Orion tries to stand his ground, pointing out that his magic has always gotten the job done for the party. He's barely mid-sentence before Daniel snaps at him and tells him to shut his mouth, while the other girls in the party look on with total disgust. Daniel gets right in his face, screaming that Orion's magic is so pathetic it doesn't even matter if it exists or not. It makes no difference to the team's success. Orion is stunned to realize that Daniel has been hiding this much resentment behind his back. Daniel continues the verbal assault, saying it's a total embarrassment to have a loser in the group who can't even handle the 6 basic elements. Orion tries to think about the logistics, wondering if the team is really ready to lose the guy who has handled every bit of magic for them so far. He knows their combat power is going to take a massive hit without his support spells, especially if they run into enemies that only magic can touch. Instead of listening, Daniel just bursts out laughing. He doesn't take Orion's warnings seriously at all. Daniel reveals he's already ahead of the game and has already found a replacement. He's scouted a veteran mage who holds the prestigious quadruple element title to take Orion's place. The news hits Orion hard because he knows that title is only given to the absolute best mages out there. He realizes that if the party has someone of that caliber coming in, he really is useless to them now. Seeing that there's no turning back, Orion finally gives up. He tells Daniel he understands and admits that if this is how they feel, it can't be helped. He grabs the door handle, ready to walk away for good. Daniel doesn't waste any time and tells Orion to get lost, calling him a total dropout. Orion doesn't fire back with any insults though. He just gives a small, sad smile and says he's actually glad they got to travel together as long as they did. Daniel gets a twisted look on his face and says he can't wait to see Orion rot. He mocks him for being a useless mage who can't even handle the basics and says he's going to enjoy watching Orion's life fall apart now that he's been kicked out. Orion walks away from the group and out into the hallway. As he heads toward the exit, he starts wondering what his next move should even be. The reality of his situation starts to sink in as he walks through the woods. The guild has basically labeled him as rankless, and he knows that without a proper rank, no one is going to want to take a chance on him for a new party. Looking back, Orion thinks about how his old party was entirely made up of his childhood friends. It hits him pretty hard because they had been together for so long, and now that history is just gone. He thinks back to a year ago when the party first formed. He can still remember the day they started out like it was yesterday. In a flashback to his training, a younger Orion tries to follow the rules of modern magic. He calls out to the mana of flame, chanting for it to turn into a bolt of fire and strike down his enemy. Despite his efforts, nothing happens. Orion stares at his hand in total silence, realizing that the mana isn't responding to his voice or the chant at all. He starts to realize that the problem is modern magic theory itself. It's completely different from what he sees with his own eyes, and he concludes that if he's forced to use chants to control mana, he'll never be able to do it. Instead of following the textbooks, Orion tries something different. He looks directly at a glowing orb of energy and calls out to the crimson mana sitting right there in front of him. In a flashback to their school days, Emily thinks about how Orion eventually stopped mentioning his ability to see mana orbs. She watches him from a distance, noticing how he's changed. She remembers how Daniel used to bully him, pointing him out and calling him a compulsive liar. Emily realizes Daniel was likely just projecting his own need for attention onto Orion. Even though everyone told Orion he had zero talent for magic, Emily saw him out there every single day, refusing to give up on his training. Emily goes looking for him, assuming he's at his usual training spot in the woods. Nearby, Orion is focused on a specific point, calling out to the crimson mana he sees floating in the air. Emily stops in her tracks, her eyes going wide as she witnesses something she can't explain. Orion lets out a shout for the magic to fire, and suddenly a massive, swirling orb of flames erupts right in front of him. Emily stands there completely frozen, unable to process the scale of the magic. Orion himself looks completely caught off guard. He stares up at the fire he just produced, shocked that he actually managed to make something happen. Emily quietly calls out his name, which makes Orion jump. He sees the look on her face and realizes she just saw the whole thing, including the weird way he cast the spell. Orion sees how shaken Emily is as she asks how he did that. In that moment, it hits him that the magic he's using is completely different from what everyone else considers normal. It's a power that shouldn't even exist according to their textbooks. Looking back, Orion gives a hollow laugh. He knows Emily must have been scared of him after seeing that, but he appreciates that she kept his secret and never said a word to anyone else. Orion starts thinking about his future and realizes that hiding his true strength while trying to make new friends would be way too much work. He decides that, for the time being, he's better off not joining another party. He takes a moment to stretch out in the forest, officially deciding to stick to solo play for a while. After spending so much time grinding away in the hero's party, he figures he's earned a bit of a break and some peace and quiet. Since he isn't in any rush, he plans to spend his free time digging into the mystery of his mana-seeing eyes. He's got plenty of time now, so he might as well figure out what's really going on with his power. The scene shifts to a mountain pass where a pack of wolves is cornering a carriage. A young female mage with her hair in pigtails stands her ground, holding an open magic book as the predators growl nearby. The merchant in the carriage looks worried and asks if she can actually handle this. She tells him not to worry and apologizes for the scare, but firmly tells him to get back and hide in the luggage while she deals with the wolves. She locks onto her targets with a look of pure focus, calling out to the fire mana around her. A glowing magic circle forms beneath her as she finishes her chant. She commands the flames to gather into a strike that will drop her enemies. With a shout, she launches a fireball right at the lead wolf. The impact is immediate, sending a burst of heat across the path. The wolf gets blasted by the spell and yelps in pain as the fire hits its mark. Seeing her in action, the merchant is totally blown away and shouts about how great her magic is. He starts to feel a lot better about their chances of getting through this alive. The pigtail mage starts to panic, sweating as she realizes she's in over her head and wondering what to do. Behind her, the merchant has no idea how much trouble they're in and starts cheering, thinking the fight is already over and they're safe. Things are actually getting worse because a huge pack of monsters called bounce dogs is starting to swarm the area. The mage realizes there are way too many of them gathering for her to handle on her own. From the perspective of one of the wolves, the girl looks small and vulnerable as she tries to protect the carriage and the horses. She tries to cast another fire spell, but she's too slow. A wolf lunges at her with its jaws wide open, and she realizes she isn't going to finish the chant in time to stop it. Just as the wolf is about to hit her, a massive blast of wind magic comes out of nowhere and sweeps the monsters away. The mage stands there in total shock, clutching her book and wondering what just happened. Orion runs onto the scene and asks her if she's okay. She just stares at him, completely confused about where he came from. She thanks him, but she's still processing everything. It hits her that the crazy powerful magic she just saw must have been his doing. As Orion stands by her side, she tries to save a bit of face. She tells him that she only had trouble because there were just too many enemies for one person. Looking around, the situation is still pretty bad as more wolves keep coming out of the trees. She admits that she was really struggling to keep them back. She looks down at her book and tells Orion that even though they literally just met, she really needs his help. The pigtail mage looks Orion right in the eye, her expression serious. She drops her pride and asks him if he can lend her a bit of his strength to handle the situation. Orion doesn't hesitate for a second. He gives her a kind smile and says that of course he'll help. Orion looks out at the swarming wolves and starts reading the flow of energy around them. He sees orbs of blue and green mana everywhere, but notices there's almost no red mana to work with. He starts thinking about the best way to handle the fight given the types of energy available. Orion turns his back to the girl and starts a chant for a fire foundation. The mage is totally thrown off and asks what he's doing, especially since fire seems like a weird choice with no red mana around. Orion reaches out and grabs a glowing orb, calling it emerald mana. He starts manipulating the energy with his hand, causing the air to swirl violently as he prepares his move. With a single command, Orion tells the energy to disperse. A massive spiraling blast of wind magic erupts from his hand, tearing through the area in front of the carriage. The wind isn't just a gust, it turns into sharp blades that slice right through the wolves. The pack of monsters doesn't stand a chance as the magic shreds them instantly. The mage is completely frozen, her eyes wide with shock. She's never seen anything move that fast or be that precise. The girl ends up collapsing onto the ground, staring up at Orion like he's a total monster. She asks him if he really just used chantless magic, since what he did shouldn't be possible for a normal mage. Looking at the field of defeated monsters, she's still trying to wrap her head around it. She can't believe he took out that entire pack of bounce dogs in just 1 second. The pigtail mage looks up at Orion in total disbelief. She's completely shaken by what she just saw and asks him if he's actually some kind of world-famous, high-ranking mage hiding his identity. Orion just gives her a sheepish smile and holds out his hand. He tells her he's just a guy named Orion and mentions he's actually nothing special, seeing as he just got kicked out of his previous adventuring party. The girl doesn't buy it for a second. She gets right in his face, her eyes wide with excitement, and asks again if he's really the Lord Orion she's thinking of. Orion is totally caught off guard by the formal title. He repeats it back to her, looking pretty awkward and wondering why she's suddenly acting like he's royalty. The pigtail mage is in her own world now, clutching her chest and looking like she's about to faint from joy. She says she never expected to meet someone like him out here. Orion just watches her, thinking she must have him confused with some other guy. She leans in even closer, practically cornering him. She tells him that using simultaneous chantless wind cutters like he did is basically a miracle. She's convinced there's no way he's anyone else but a master. Orion tries to correct her, saying that what he used wasn't even a wind cutter, but she's not listening at all. While she continues to gush over him, the merchant in the back is just relieved that the danger is finally over. With stars in her eyes, the girl makes a sudden, desperate plea. She begs Orion to take her on as his apprentice right then and there. As she looks at him, she thinks back to her own past. Ever since she was a little kid, people saw her as a magic prodigy, which led to her being adopted by the noble Berg family. She eventually went to the Royal Magic Academy, where all the geniuses in the country go. Even among the elite, she was a star, getting top marks and mastering 3 different types of elemental magic. Alice thinks about her own status, noting that she was even awarded the rank of quadruple element because she can layer 4 different magical attributes. While she takes a lot of pride in the power she's built up through training, she knows she can't just sit back and be satisfied with where she's at. She remembers a specific goodwill match back in the day where seeing Orion fight completely changed her perspective. It was a total shock to her. Watching him back then, she noticed his magic was actually activating before he even finished his chants. She started to suspect he was just pretending to chant to hide how fast he really was. In that moment, she had to admit to herself that her own magic was still a long way off from reaching his level. She made up her mind right then to become a mage just like Orion. Her plan was to keep taking on as many quests as possible to close that gap, but things clearly didn't go as expected given her recent trouble with the wolves. Back in the present, a massive, steaming pile of food is dropped on the table in front of Orion at a local eatery. Alice tells Orion he should order whatever he likes. She insists on paying for the whole meal as a way to thank him for saving her and the merchant earlier. Orion feels a bit awkward and tells her he's already been thanked plenty, but Alice isn't having it. She tells him that just a meal isn't nearly enough to show her gratitude. The innkeeper walks by and looks at Alice's plate, acting surprised. He asks her if that's really all she's planning to eat. He lets it slip that she usually orders enough food for 3 people every time she comes in. Alice gets totally flustered and tells him to be quiet while Orion watches the exchange. Alice looks pretty embarrassed and admits that just one serving of food isn't really going to cut it for her. Orion looks at the massive plate already sitting there and points out that it looks like more than enough food, but he starts to realize she's serious. As Alice digs in, Orion asks if it's really okay for her to eat that much. He quickly follows up by saying that for an adventurer, having a big appetite and eating whenever you get the chance is actually a pretty important skill. Moving on, Alice calls out to the innkeeper and asks for 2 more servings. Orion just sighs and says he totally saw that coming. Once the meal is over, Alice sits up straight in her chair and addresses Orion with a very serious look on her face. She clenches her hands on her lap, looking a bit nervous, and asks him if she can introduce herself properly this time. She stands up and formally introduces herself as Alice Berg. She tells him she graduated from the Royal Magic Academy and can use 3 different elements: fire, water, and wind. But she's not done yet. She explains that she can actually layer those attributes into a quadruple element rank. She promises she won't be a drag on him and begs him to take her on as his student. Orion looks at her, completely caught off guard. He thinks to himself that being a quadruple element at her age is actually crazy and that she's a world-class talent. He ends up face-palming, feeling totally overwhelmed because he has no idea what he's supposed to even teach someone as gifted as her. The innkeeper brings out a massive, steaming plate of food and tells them he's sorry for the long wait. The innkeeper laughs and claps Orion on the shoulder, nearly making him choke on his drink. He says he's heard all about the famous Orion from Alice. The innkeeper keeps going, calling Orion a total revolutionary who doesn't follow the usual guild rules. Alice just sits there looking super embarrassed while he mentions she never stops talking about him. Orion keeps eating and tells Alice she's giving him way too much credit. He says he isn't some amazing mage and tells her he's sorry, but he can't take her on as a student. Alice looks pretty crushed by the rejection, barely able to find the words to respond. Trying to change the subject, Orion mentions how great the food is and asks her what she thinks. Alice just looks down at her plate, feeling like things aren't going the way she hoped. Once they finish their massive meal, they thank the innkeeper for the food. He tells them to come back and visit again whenever they want. Standing outside, Alice thanks Orion and tells him he was a really big help today. Orion just smiles and says he actually had a fun time too. As Orion walks away into the night, he thinks about what a genius she is for being able to use 4 elements. He figures that since they're from different worlds, they probably won't ever see each other again. The very next day at the Adventurers Guild, Alice comes running up to him with a huge smile. She screams out for her master, and Orion realizes he's not going to get away from her that easily. Orion starts losing his cool and shouts that he's already told her he isn't master material. Alice doesn't seem to care at all, just making a silly face and sticking her tongue out at him. They head inside a building where a big muscular guy with a blindfold notices them. He asks Alice what she's even doing there, and she just brushes it off, claiming it's a total coincidence they ran into each other. Alice starts blushing and accidentally lets it slip that she saw Orion and followed him. She immediately panics and tries to take it back, insisting she wasn't chasing him, but Orion knows better and just thinks to himself that she definitely followed him. Orion turns his attention to the guild's quest board. He looks over the postings and sighs, noting that even though he expected it, there really aren't any decent jobs available for someone at his level. Alice asks him what kind of quest he's actually looking for. Orion admits he hasn't picked anything specific yet, but he mentions that his low adventure rank is making it hard to find anything worthwhile. The board is covered in G-rank jobs like searching for lost cats or cleaning out sewer slimes. Orion looks at them and says it's exactly what he expected from his rank, nothing but boring chores. Suddenly, Alice gets a bright idea and tells Orion to wait right there for a second. She runs off and comes back a moment later with a stack of papers in her arms. She shows them to Orion and asks him what he thinks about doing some quests from this pile instead. Orion starts flipping through the papers she brought over. He admits that they actually look like great jobs, but he's clearly hesitant about something. He reminds Alice that he can't just take these because he's still stuck at G rank. He explains that even though the jobs are good, he's technically unranked as a mage and doesn't have the status to accept high-level requests like C or D rank missions. Alice laughs to herself as if she's got the perfect plan and then slams her hand on the table, telling Orion that this is exactly where she comes in to save the day. She reveals that she's actually a C-rank adventurer and suggests a loophole. If Orion makes her his disciple, they can use the guild's master-disciple system to let him take on C-rank quests as her supervisor. Orion isn't buying it and points out how impossible that sounds. He says it's a stretch for someone at G-rank to be the leader of a C-rank disciple. He gives her a look and sarcastically asks if he should just start calling her Master Alice since she's the one with the higher rank. Alice completely loses it and starts waving her hands around in a panic, telling Orion there's no way he should ever call her that. Orion tells her to relax and get real because he was obviously just joking. Moving on, Orion gets serious and explains that she has nothing to gain by making an unranked guy like him her master. He reminds her that the Adventurers Guild carries a lot of weight in this world. He explains that the rankings the guild gives out are tied directly to an adventurer's status. Since the guild already decided he's unranked, Alice trying to make him her master would look like she's trying to pick a fight with the guild's authority. Orion reminds her that she's a graduate from the Royal Magic Academy with a huge future ahead of her. He says he doesn't want to be the reason her reputation gets ruined. Alice doesn't want to hear any of it and shouts back that she couldn't care less about her career or what people think of her. Alice looks down with a sad expression and tells Orion that she really just wants him to teach her magic. Orion looks worried and tells Alice she's probably just shaken up because of the danger they were in, which is messing with her judgment. Alice isn't having it. She pouts and tells him that's not the case at all. Getting serious, Alice explains that there's magic out there that isn't taught in any academy. She says she wants to chase every possibility, and she's totally convinced that Orion's magic holds the key to what she's looking for. Orion rubs his chin, realizing that she has no intention of backing down. He lets out a sigh and finally gives in a little bit. He tells her that she should just stick around and watch him for a while to see how he does things. Alice looks surprised as Orion adds that if she still feels the same way after some time has passed, he'll consider her request again. He asks her what she thinks of that deal. He's secretly hoping that once she calms down, she'll realize how crazy it is to want someone like him as a teacher. Alice gets all excited and asks if this is some kind of entrance exam to become his disciple, but Orion immediately shuts her down and tells her she's wrong. Alice tells Orion that since this is just a trial period, she's going to make herself so useful that he won't even be able to handle daily life without her. Getting right in his face, she tells Orion he better get ready for what's coming. Orion holds his head in his hands, completely stressed out and wondering how his life turned into this. Later, the two of them arrive at a Lamor forest. Orion makes it clear that they aren't doing the whole master and disciple thing yet, and for now, they're just going to focus on a basic G-rank quest. Alice is totally on board and shouts her agreement. With stars in her eyes, Alice declares that she's going to learn every single thing she possibly can from him today. Orion looks at her sparkly expression and feels the pressure. He thinks to himself that it's pretty awkward for her to have such high expectations when they're literally just here to pick some weeds. He gives her a fair warning, telling her she's probably going to regret coming along once she realizes how boring the work actually is. Alice checks the quest sheet and sees they need to find red and green herbs, confirming that it is indeed a simple gathering mission. Alice points toward a patch of trees and suggests she head that way to start looking, but Orion stops her immediately and says she doesn't need to bother. Orion explains that he's looking for green and orange mana instead. He reaches out his hand and gives a command for the mana to start searching the area. The mana orbs shoot out into the forest, zipping through the air. Alice watches them go, looking pretty confused about what Orion is actually doing. The glowing spheres dive into the bushes, hovering directly over specific plants hidden in the greenery. Orion stands tall as his magic sweeps the area, while Alice just stands there with her mouth open, trying to process how much mana he's throwing around for a simple task. Orion looks at the forest with focus, confirming to himself that the search is working exactly how he planned. He tells Alice that he's pretty much figured out where everything is. She looks at him like he's crazy and asks what on earth he's talking about. Across the entire clearing, dozens of glowing orbs light up like lanterns, each one marking the exact location of the herbs they need. Orion reaches into a patch of tall grass and pulls out a perfect specimen. He looks it over with a smirk and says the quality isn't bad at all. Alice completely loses it, screaming in total shock at how effortlessly he just bypassed the searching part of the quest. She demands to know how he could possibly know the herb was right there. Orion just looks at her while kneeling and says it's simply because that's how his magic works. Alice tries to accept the explanation, thinking to herself that it makes sense in theory, but she still can't wrap her head around seeing it happen. Meanwhile, the orbs continue to point out even more herbs nearby. Alice is still reeling from what she's seeing, admitting that she has never encountered detection magic with this much precision in her life. Orion brushes it off, claiming he doesn't even know how to use high-level techniques like detection magic. He moves on to the next spot, pointing out even more herbs nearby. He looks at the common red and green herbs and wonders if he grabbed the wrong thing. He shows her a different plant he just picked, which immediately catches her eye. Alice completely loses it, shouting at him and asking if he realizes he's holding a yellow herb. She explains that it's an incredibly rare material, but Orion just looks confused and asks if it's really that big of a deal. Alice starts carefully tucking the herb away for safekeeping while Orion just watches her, thinking to himself that the herb wasn't even that difficult to find. Just then, Orion's expression shifts. He goes quiet and looks off into the distance as the mana in the air starts to change. He looks up at the trees and notices the mana orbs are starting to act restless, making him wonder what's going on. The peaceful search is cut short when a massive, muscular monster with bone armor bursts through the trees. Orion realizes something dangerous is definitely in the forest with them. Alice gets scared and asks Orion if he heard that terrifying roar just now. Orion and Alice are supposed to be on a simple G-rank quest for herb picking, but things take a turn. Alice panics and calls out to Orion, while he calmly confirms that something is definitely lurking nearby. Alice looks ahead and is completely shocked by what she sees. In the distance, the massive, dark shape of a monster stands between them and the rest of the forest. Alice recognizes the threat immediately and asks if that's actually an orc king. The monster's face is terrifying, showing off its tusks and cold, white eyes. Alice is shaking, asking why a high-level monster like this would even be in a low-level area. Orion doesn't look scared at all, keeping a sharp eye on the beast. Alice explains that this forest is normally a safe spot for beginners, but Orion just shrugs it off. He casually says they should probably just kill it, which makes Alice completely lose her mind. Orion doesn't wait for a plan and just steps up, holding his hand out toward the monster. He calls out to the green and orange mana orbs he sees floating in the air. The mana reacts instantly to his command. A massive force comes crashing down from the sky, slamming right into the orc boss before it can even move. Orion tells the magic to pour down, and suddenly a hail of giant boulders rains from above. The monster is buried under the weight of the rocks in seconds. Alice stands there with a blank stare, totally unable to compute how easily he handled a boss-level threat. Orion just sighs, acting like it was no big deal, and tells the leftover mana to disperse. Once the dust settles, Alice finally finds her voice and lets out a long scream of pure shock at what she just witnessed. Alice is still reeling from the explosion and asks Orion what kind of magic he just used. Orion looks a bit awkward, rubbing the back of his neck while casually saying it was basically a meteor strike. Alice can't stay calm and points out that he didn't just use high-level magic, but he pulled off a triple spell without even using a chant. Orion tries to wave it off and change the subject, but Alice gets right in his face. She isn't letting him off the hook and demands to know what's going on with his power. Alice explains that an orc king is a massive threat that usually takes an entire team of A-rank adventurers to bring down. Orion looks genuinely surprised and asks if they're really that tough, while secretly regretting that he let his true strength slip. They both look over at the massive crater where the monster used to be. Alice screams that a solo kill on something like that is impossible, while Orion realizes he's gotten way too comfortable around her if he's starting to show off this much. As Alice crouches down to look at the remains, Orion gets serious for a second. He asks her if she finds his magic creepy or weird since it's so far beyond normal logic. Alice looks up at him with a bright smile, looking completely confused as to why he would even ask something like that. She looks at her own hands and says her magic still has a long way to go. She tells him that if there's more potential to be found, it's only natural to chase it with everything she's got. Alice is practically sparkling with excitement now. She declares that he really is the best mage in the world and officially starts calling him master. While Alice is beaming with pure admiration, Orion is completely losing it. He's sweating and looks totally overwhelmed by the sudden title and the intense praise. Orion looks at Alice and sees her as a girl completely driven by ambition. He feels the weight of her intense expectations. He starts worrying that having her as a disciple is a bad idea. He feels like he'd be responsible for her wasting her entire life if he lets her follow him. They head toward the Adventurers Guild. Orion decides the best way to handle this is to show her the most boring, mundane parts of his daily routine to dampen her excitement. At the guild counter, Alice slams down a massive basket of herbs. She loudly announces that the quest is finished and asks the staff to process the delivery. The guild receptionist is completely floored. She looks at the pile of herbs and asks how Alice managed to get so many, especially since she only picked up the job earlier that day. The receptionist starts pointing out that Alice actually brought back the wrong plants, telling her those aren't yellow herbs. While they go back and forth, Orion stands back and realizes his plan failed. He wanted to hide his identity through boring work, but this is just becoming a tedious mess for Alice. Orion decides to change tactics. He looks at Alice and tells her it's time to move on to something else. He tells her that starting tomorrow, he's planning to focus on magic research instead of simple gathering quests. Alice's face lights up immediately. She gets right in his space and asks if she's really going to be allowed to watch her master perform magic research. Orion is caught off guard by her intense energy. He realizes he should have seen that reaction coming, seeing how obsessed she is with high-level magic. The scene shifts to the Scorched Dungeon. Inside, the group realizes that Orion is actually gone, and someone asks if he really left them. Emily, the party's ranger, is totally losing it and asks how they're supposed to hunt a dragon without Orion's help. Luna the Knight is just as heated and says this has to be some kind of sick joke. Daniel looks at them like they're crazy and asks why they're so worked up over nothing. He tells them it doesn't matter if Orion is there or not, because a useless guy like him wouldn't make a difference either way. He points out that today's quest is a dragon hunt and says that for a failure who can't even use basic magic, the gear is probably too heavy for him to carry anyway. Emily just stands there with her head down, looking completely miserable. Emily is in total shock. She looks at Daniel and wonders what the hell he's even talking about. She starts thinking back to their past battles and realizes that the only reason they ever made it this far was because of Orion's magic. She knows deep down that he was the one secretly filling in all the gaps and covering for their mistakes the entire time. Daniel isn't having any of it and tells her there's no way that's true. He asks her why Orion would be unranked if he was actually as good as she thinks he is. Emily starts to answer but trails off, unable to find the words as she looks away. She remembers a moment from when they were kids standing in the woods. She realizes it was her own fault. Because she acted scared of his power back then, Orion decided to start hiding his special abilities from everyone. Emily still can't bring herself to explain it to Daniel. She just stands there looking sad while Daniel gets more and more annoyed by the silence. Daniel is completely losing his cool, yelling at the girls to shut up. He gets defensive and asks them if they're seriously doubting his judgment as the leader. He keeps acting tough, saying it doesn't matter if they're hunting a dragon. He claims that as long as they have a hero like him, the whole quest is going to be easy. Luna and Emily just stand there looking exhausted and unconvinced. Emily looks away, feeling guilty. She wonders if Orion finally just got sick of their behavior and decided to walk out on them for good. Luna starts to realize the truth too. She looks pretty stressed and thinks about how Orion was actually the one doing all the heavy lifting for the team the entire time. As Daniel stomps off deeper into the dungeon, it's clear he's the only one who has no idea what's actually going on or how much they needed Orion. The heat in the Scorched Dungeon starts to get to them. Daniel is already drenched in sweat and yells out about how hot it is. Daniel is basically throwing a tantrum, demanding to know why it's so hot. Emily is visibly drained and tells him to be quiet, pointing out that they literally just stepped inside the dungeon. Emily tries to cool down by taking a drink, but she's clearly struggling with the intense environment. She finally figures out why it's so much harder this time. She explains that the only reason they were comfortable before was because Orion was constantly using his magic to regulate the temperature for everyone. Daniel is still in denial and tells her to stop talking about that stupid stuff. He's too busy being angry to notice that a massive pack of monsters is closing in on them from the shadows. Luna quickly covers Daniel's mouth to shut him up. She warns him to stay quiet because his constant yelling is starting to agitate the dungeon bats nearby. Emily sees the danger coming and immediately draws her bow, aiming at the shadows where the monsters are hiding. Things go south fast as a massive swarm of bats drops from the ceiling. Emily looks at the sheer number of them and realizes they're completely surrounded, asking the others what the plan is. Even Daniel is starting to feel the pressure now. He looks pretty stressed and finally admits to himself that trying to handle a situation like this without Orion's help is going to be way harder than he thought. Despite being nervous, Daniel decides to act tough. He draws his sword and charges into the swarm, telling the girls to leave everything to him. Luna tries to stop him, but he's already gone. His hero moment doesn't last long. A bat immediately latches onto his head and starts biting, making him lose it and shout out in pain. Daniel is flailing around like a mess, complaining that he can't even land a hit on the small, fast targets. Luna just stands back and sighs, saying she knew exactly how this was going to go. Luna puts up a protective barrier to keep the bats back, but she's clearly reaching her limit. She asks Emily what they're supposed to do next because her defensive skills won't last forever. Emily pulls out a special arrow with a crystal attached and says she's got it covered. She tells the group to get ready to run as fast as they can. The party makes a break for it. As they retreat, a bruised and battered Daniel is still complaining, wondering why he's the one getting stuck in such a miserable spot. After their disastrous run in the cave, the group is feeling pretty beat. Luna looks completely drained and says that if they keep going like this, hunting a dragon is never going to happen. She tells the others they seriously need to find Orion and beg him to come back to the party. Daniel doesn't take the suggestion well at all. He gets all red-faced and angry, yelling that there's no way he's doing something that embarrassing. He tries to play off his failure, shouting that he just had an off day and it wasn't a big deal. Even though they're struggling, Daniel's ego won't let him quit. He gets a determined look on his face and tells himself that he's going to finish the dragon-slaying quest no matter what, and he'll do it without any help from Orion. Later, the party heads to the Adventurers Guild to try and fix their situation. The receptionist looks at them with a bit of pity and explains that they already sent word that the party's request was officially declined. Daniel immediately starts making a scene at the counter, shouting that it's impossible for a prestigious hero party to get rejected like that. Luna tries to pull him back and tell him to chill out, but he's too busy throwing a tantrum. While he's ranting, Daniel mentions that they'd have no problem clearing dungeons if they just had a decent mage with them. Just then, he spots Alice sitting at a table across the room and points her out to the girls. Alice is just trying to mind her own business, but she can feel Daniel's eyes on her. She looks over and is immediately annoyed, thinking he's being a total creep for staring at her like that. Daniel turns on the charm and walks over, striking a ridiculous sparkly pose. He flashes a grin and asks Alice if she's the one everyone calls Alice. Alice isn't impressed by the act at all. She gives him a skeptical look and confirms that's her name, but then she immediately asks him who he thinks he is. Luna tries one more time to get Daniel to stop bothering people, but he completely ignores her. He stands tall and proudly announces that he's Daniel, the leader of the legendary hero party. Alice repeats the words hero party back to Daniel, her voice trailing off as she starts to connect the dots about who she's talking to. Her eyes narrow as she looks at him with a much colder expression. She asks him flat out if they're the ones who kicked Orion out of their group. Daniel doesn't pick up on her tone at all and keeps acting like a big shot, telling her the guild must not have the full story. He says he's actually there to scout her, going on about how impressive it is that she's mastered 4 elements at her age and that he wants her power for his team. Alice doesn't even let him finish before shutting him down with a hard no. Daniel's face completely drops and he can't seem to process the instant rejection. She starts walking right past them, telling them she has somewhere to be and asking them to move out of her way so she can leave. Daniel starts to freak out, sweating as he shouts after her, demanding to know why she'd turned down such a massive opportunity. He gets desperate and starts yelling about the perks, saying she'd get fame, status, and anything she could ever want if she joined. He even tells her he'll pay her whatever she asks for just to get her to stay. Alice stops for a second and looks back, admitting that saving the world is a pretty big responsibility and a role that's actually worth something to most people. But then a soft smile spreads across her face and she starts to blush. She tells him that there's a certain person, referring to Orion, that she really wants to stay next to. While Daniel and Luna stand there looking totally stunned, Alice explains that she's finally found her own life goal. She says she wants to stay with Orion, so there's absolutely no way she's joining their party. Daniel takes a second to process everything, looking a bit stressed as he tries to play it cool. He says he gets it, but then he asks who this person is that she's so stuck on. The second the name leaves his mouth, Daniel starts sweating. He shouts that she's talking about Orion, and the realization hits Luna so hard she's completely stunned. Daniel's attitude flips back to being a jerk immediately. He tells Alice she needs to give up on that idea because Orion is just unranked trash who couldn't even cut it in their party. He keeps going, mocking Orion by saying there's no way the guy could ever make it as a solo adventurer. Luna looks down, feeling uneasy and calling out Daniel's name to try and get him to stop. Alice has finally had enough. A terrifying pressure starts coming off her as she glares at him, telling Daniel that even if he is the hero, there are some things you just don't say. The look on her face is so intense that Daniel completely folds. He starts whimpering, looking like he's about to lose it from the sheer intimidation. Daniel flinches back as the air in the room gets heavy with Alice's anger. He's totally terrified of the mage he was just trying to recruit. He looks like he's on the verge of tears, barely able to make a sound while Alice continues to stare him down. Suddenly, Alice's expression shifts. She seems to snap out of it and shouts that she was in the wrong for how she reacted. Alice immediately drops into a deep bow, apologizing over and over. She admits she just lost her temper because she couldn't stay quiet while he was insulting the person she looks up to. Alice is bright red and hiding her face in her hands. She says she feels totally ashamed of herself for losing her cool like that. Alice looks over at Luna and tells her not to worry about it, though she's still clearly bothered that a party leader would say such things. Luna can only offer a nervous, awkward smile in response. Alice decides it's time to go and tells the group she's leaving because she's already kept Orion waiting too long. In the background, Daniel is hiding away, looking completely drained and humiliated. After Alice leaves, Luna looks down, feeling regretful. She thinks about how she completely missed her chance to ask Alice more about what Orion is up to these days. Watching Alice walk away through the window, Luna wonders to herself if Orion is doing okay. She quickly shoots the thought down, figuring she doesn't even have the right to show her face to him anymore. Back inside, Daniel is absolutely fuming. He clenches his fist and lets out a quiet, angry shout, unable to handle how the conversation went. Luna tries to talk some sense into him, telling Daniel he was the one in the wrong and that he needs to be way nicer to Alice. Daniel isn't having it and barks back at her to shut up and stop telling him what to do. The tension in the room hasn't gone unnoticed. Nearby, the other people in the tavern start whispering to each other, asking if everyone saw the scene that just played out. The gossip starts spreading fast. People are mocking Daniel for being terrified of a girl and mentioning how he just lashed out at her. One guy even brings up that he heard the current hero is only relevant because of his master, Edward. Daniel hears everything they're saying and it drives him crazy. He glares at nothing in particular, realizing that his reputation is taking a much bigger hit than he ever expected. Daniel finally snaps at the gawking crowd in the tavern, yelling at them to get lost and reminding them that his life isn't a show for their entertainment. He's bright red and clearly reaching his limit, while Luna just stands by looking concerned. Luna tries to pull Daniel away, suggesting they should just get out of there. Daniel looks like he's about to explode from the frustration of the whole situation. As they leave, Daniel is literally growling with rage in the background. Luna's mind wanders and she wonders what Orion is up to at that very moment. Meanwhile, Orion is back in his room looking calm and focused. He holds his notebook and tells himself it's time to get started with his work for the day. He looks at his book, titled Introduction to Magic, and thinks about the common reasons why people struggle to trigger their spells. Orion sits on his bed, surrounded by the glowing mana orbs only he can see. He knows the usual problems are low mana or bad visualization. But since he can see the mana directly, he can just command it to make magic happen whenever he wants. He realizes that this unique ability is exactly why his situation is so messy and complicated. Just then, he hears Alice's voice calling out to him from the door, calling him Master. Orion opens the door and notes that Alice is surprisingly early. She's standing there ready to go, looking as cheerful as ever. Alice gives him a big smile and says she was so excited that she just couldn't wait any longer. Alice asks what they're going to be researching today. Orion tells her he's sticking to the basics of magic, but he warns her she might find it a bit boring compared to what she's used to. Orion starts to get a bit nervous, thinking that if he keeps failing at even the most basic spells, Alice will eventually realize he's a fraud and regret becoming his student. He tries to put on a show anyway, pointing his hand forward and chanting for the fire mana to gather and strike. Alice is right behind him, watching with total awe and expecting something big to happen. Orion tells her to prepare herself for what's coming, but Alice just looks at him with a big question mark over her head. He realizes this awkward pattern has been repeating itself all day and he's not getting anywhere. Alice finally loses it and screams, asking why the magic isn't actually activating. Orion is bright red now, thinking about how humiliating it is to fail this hard in front of a literal magic genius like her. He keeps cycling through the elements, calling for fire, wind, and water mana one after another. Nothing happens, and he has to admit to himself that he's definitely striking out across the board. As he continues his failed attempts, Orion figures that by now, Alice should have reached her limit and given up on him. He expected her to be totally over it by this point. He starts sweating, feeling the mental toll of failing so many times in a row. He gives it another shot, desperately calling for the mana of the earth to do anything to save his pride. Just as he's about to try again, Alice raises her hand and calls out to him to get his attention. Orion looks over at her, feeling pretty defeated. He's convinced that she's finally had enough of his clumsiness and is about to tell him how useless he really is. Alice looks pretty hesitant, looking down and admitting that she might be being a bit rude with what she's about to say next. Orion doesn't take it personally at all and tells her it's a natural way to feel, so she shouldn't worry about it. That gets Alice fired up, and she says that as a mage she just can't help being curious about what's going on. Orion is a bit thrown off by her sudden energy and just gives a confused look, wondering what she's getting at. Alice points a finger up and asks him flat out if he's actually doubting the magic textbooks and thinks they're full of lies. The idea hits Orion pretty hard, and he stands there wondering if the magic textbooks really could be wrong this whole time. Looking at a stack of old books, Orion realizes he never even considered the possibility that the world's established theories were the mistake. He always figured he was just the broken one and gave up on ever understanding magic. He looks at her and asks if she's actually some kind of genius for pointing that out, which leaves Alice totally flustered and blushing. Orion starts looking through the shelves, realizing that if he changes his entire perspective, there's no point in him studying these traditional theories anymore. Alice just watches him, feeling a bit confused. Turning back to her, Orion tells Alice he's got a favor to ask and needs her help with something, catching her completely off guard. Alice is more than happy to help at first, but she quickly loses it when she hears what Orion actually wants her to do. She sees Orion holding a basket full of scales and asks if those are really wind dragon scales and why he has so many of them. Orion explains that there are probably a ton more just sitting in the warehouse and tells her he wants to use them for an experiment. Orion starts the process, knowing that passing mana through these scales creates specific green and blue mana orbs. He hovers his hand over the basket, and the mana begins to react just like he expected. The room is now set up in a state where it should be almost impossible for fire magic to work. Orion tells Alice he's counting on her, and she gives him a confident nod. Alice gets into position and calls out for the fire mana to manifest. Orion watches her intently, telling her he wants to see exactly how the mana changes during the process. Just then, Orion's eyes go wide and he starts sweating as he sees something that shouldn't be happening. He can't believe what's unfolding right in front of him. From his perspective, he can see the mana clearly as the incantation calls for it to become the foundation of fire. It hits him that the way the world understands magic feels completely backwards compared to the reality he sees. As the chant commands the magic to strike, Orion notices that the mana doesn't resist the logic of the words at all. Instead, it changes color and submits to the spell perfectly. Alice shouts out "Fireball," and even though the room was supposed to suppress it, a massive blast of fire erupts. Alice looks surprised by the sheer power of it. Orion is totally shaken and asks Alice if she didn't feel anything strange about that. Alice just looks at him, completely confused as to why he's so stressed out. Alice looks at Orion with total confusion, not seeing what he's so worked up about. She tells him that everything seems normal to her and asks what's wrong. It turns out that people in the past only came up with incantations so they could use magic without needing to see the mana orbs. Orion realizes that for everyone else, this invisible process is just how things are supposed to be. Moving on, Orion suggests they try some wind magic next. Alice is down for it immediately, thinking they're just doing a standard test on how well the scales work as a catalyst. Orion thinks about the word catalyst and realizes he's actually having a great time. He notes that since other people can't see the mana orbs, they probably think the scales themselves are the source of the power, rather than just something that modifies the mana already in the air. As they get ready, Orion admits to himself that he doesn't know the first thing about how people study magic these days. Alice begins the chant, calling on the spirits of the wind to gather. Orion watches her, thinking about how every technical term she uses is brand new to him. He's pretty sure she doesn't understand what he's looking for either, but Alice stays focused and commands the wind to dance. Even though they aren't totally on the same wavelength, Orion feels like they both share the same excitement for experimenting. Alice shouts out "Wind Cutter" and lets the spell fly, sending sharp gusts through the air. Orion starts laughing, clearly riding the high of the successful test. He wipes some sweat off his face and tells Alice they should find the rest of the scales and keep the experiments going. But then, Orion suddenly freezes up as a realization hits him. He realizes he messed up big time because he got way too into the research. His whole plan was to make Alice give up on being his apprentice, but instead, He's just been geeking out with her the whole time. Alice is fully leaning into the research now, looking totally fired up. She asks Orion if there are any other scales or experiments they can try out next. Later on, the scene shifts to the Adventurers Guild where Daniel is standing at the front counter. The receptionist addresses him formally as Hero Daniel. Back with Orion, he decides to just let things happen. Even though his plan to scare Alice off failed, he figures it's fine for now since he's having fun. At the guild, the receptionist informs Daniel that the guild master, Edward, is asking for him. Daniel looks pretty confused about why he's being summoned so suddenly. As he walks toward the office, Daniel starts to feel a bit of pressure. He wonders what his master could possibly want with him at a time like this. Daniel enters the office and finds Edward waiting for him behind his desk. Edward simply says his name as he walks in. Without any warning, Edward starts screaming at the top of his lungs. He calls Daniel a massive idiot right to his face. Daniel is visibly shaking and breaking out in a cold sweat. He nervously asks his master what he could possibly be so angry about. Edward gets even more intense and asks Daniel what he was thinking when he exiled Orion. Daniel is hit with a wave of panic, wondering how on earth his master found out about it. Daniel tries to save face by telling Edward that Orion was just a useless, rankless nobody anyway. Internally, he's spiraling because he thought Orion had just run away and that no one was around to see the exile happen. Edward is completely fed up, covering his eyes with his hand as he lets out a heavy sigh. He can't believe how dense his student is being right now. He explains to Daniel that the reason the guild couldn't rank Orion properly is because his magic is totally off the charts. The standard indicators they use just aren't built to measure someone on Orion's level. Daniel is visibly shaking and breaking out in a sweat, unable to accept what he's hearing. He keeps telling himself there's no way that could be true. In his head, Daniel still sees himself as the big-shot hero. He truly believes he's the center of the party and the one doing all the heavy lifting for the girls. The thought that a guy he looked down on was actually the one supporting the entire team is starting to eat at him. Moving on, we see the reality of the situation after the exile. The mage girl in his party tells him to wake up and look at reality, while Luna looks totally panicked now that she realizes Orion is actually gone. In a flashback, Daniel is getting swarmed by monsters and looking completely helpless. Edward points out that the party has done nothing but fail ever since they kicked Orion out. Daniel tries to make excuses for their recent failures, shaking as he claims they've just been going through a bit of a slump lately. Edward isn't buying it at all. He stares Daniel down and asks him if he really thinks all those disasters were just a slump. Daniel hangs his head, looking totally defeated and small in front of his master's desk. He weakly replies that it should just be a slump, but he doesn't sound convinced at all. Edward walks away from his desk, leaving Daniel sitting there in silence. He gives the kid one last piece of advice, telling him to just give up his pride and call Orion back. He warns Daniel that if he doesn't act now, it's going to be way too late to save the party. Daniel looks like he's about to break, admitting out loud that he was the one who messed up. But on the inside, he's totally fuming and telling himself not to screw around. His ego won't let him back down. He keeps repeating to himself that he's a hero and that there's no way his judgment was wrong. He's trying to block out the truth with pure denial. Moving on, Orion and Alice are walking through town together. Orion feels a bit bad and apologizes to her for always asking her to cast magic for his tests without explaining why. Alice just beams at him, saying she actually learns a ton from his experiments. She goes on about how great it is to practice magic using high-grade catalysts. In her mind, working alongside Orion is literally the best possible environment for any mage. Orion tells her he's glad she's happy with the arrangement, but he still seems a bit reserved. Alice doesn't notice at all, humming to herself as they keep walking. Alice is completely lost in her own head, imagining flower petals and sparkles everywhere. She's convinced that this little walk through town is actually a date with her master. She gets so excited that she starts spinning around and dancing in the middle of the street. Orion looks over, totally confused by her sudden energy, and asks her what's going on. She plays it cool and says it's nothing, though she's clearly still pumped. Orion starts thinking about how much she does for him. He wants to get her a gift or do something nice to thank her, but he's clearly struggling to come up with an idea. He stops by a local shop to look at some trinkets, but he quickly realizes he's out of his depth. He admits to himself that he has absolutely no clue what kind of things girls actually like. Orion is caught off guard when Alice suddenly shouts out to the shopkeeper to add another serving to their order. She's looking pretty hyped up about getting some food. Orion stops and calls her name to get her attention. He hands over a giant, steaming bun to her. Alice gets stars in her eyes immediately and asks if he's sure it's okay for her to have it, looking completely blown away by the gesture. Alice gets super emotional and says she's going to treasure this gift from her master for the rest of her life. Orion just tells her to quit being dramatic and eat it before it gets cold. Orion asks if she was even hungry since the bun is huge, and Alice tries to play it cool by saying she wasn't hungry at all. Right as she says that, her stomach lets out a massive growl that gives her away. Giving up on the act, Alice thanks him properly and starts digging into the food as they walk through the town. She stuffs her face and shouts about how good it tastes, looking like she's in heaven. Later, the two of them settle down at a table on a balcony to relax. Orion looks over at her and tells her that he was genuinely impressed by the magic she showed him earlier. He thinks back to her casting magic in the library and mentions how well she adapted to the room. He tells her that honestly, the most impressive part was just how beautiful her magic looked. Alice completely loses it and turns bright red from the compliment. She tries to brush it off, saying she's still nowhere near his level. Orion follows up his compliment by telling Alice he's not even sure if he could replicate the magic she just pulled off. Hearing that from him makes Alice turn bright red, clearly feeling pretty great about the praise. Alice starts feeling a bit guilty though, and she apologizes for burning through such a high-grade catalyst. Orion just shrugs it off, telling her it's fine since he was the one who asked her to do it in the first place. The mood shifts when Alice looks into her basket and freaks out, realizing they're completely out of red dragon scales. Orion looks pretty disappointed, saying it'd be a total waste if they couldn't keep testing out that impressive magic. He decides they shouldn't just give up there and suggests they go buy some more. He figures the local guild should have some in stock for them to pick up. They head over to the guild, and Orion walks up to the counter to grab the receptionist's attention. He gets straight to the point and tells her he's looking to buy some red dragon scales. The receptionist is caught off guard by the request. She takes a look at his adventurer card and seems confused, asking why a guy whose only G rank would need such an expensive, high-end catalyst. She gets a suspicious look in her eyes and stares him down. She asks him what he's even planning to do with something that high level. Orion just gives a vague answer, saying it's for a little bit of research he's doing. The receptionist isn't buying it and gives him a lecture, telling him that overreaching like this isn't a good look. She keeps going, telling him that magic should be handled in a way that actually fits his status. She laughs it off and says that simply using high-quality materials isn't going to magically make his skills any better. Alice absolutely loses it at the disrespect and starts shouting at the woman for talking to her master that way. Orion has to physically hold her back, trying to keep her cool so they don't cause a scene in the middle of the guild. Orion is frustrated that the guild doesn't have any red dragon scales in stock. The receptionist asks if he really wants them that badly, then jokingly suggests he just go out and harvest them himself if he's so desperate. Orion actually considers it, saying that would definitely be the fastest way to get what they need. However, he notes that he can't even enter a dungeon without the guild's permission. The receptionist tells him not to take her sarcasm so seriously. She explains that the whole reason they have a permission system is to keep reckless low ranks like him from walking into their deaths. While she laughs about it, Alice is in the background looking completely insulted on Orion's behalf. Alice suddenly grabs Orion's sleeve and starts tugging on it. Orion looks down and asks her what's going on. Alice tells him that this is the perfect moment to officially register their master-disciple relationship to prove his worth. Just as she says that, a loud voice calls out to them from across the room, catching their attention. A tall adventurer with a staff approaches the pair. He asks if he's looking at Orion, the guy who's supposedly been tricking Alice this whole time. The man introduces himself as Jais, making sure to mention that he's a B-rank adventurer while looking down on Orion. Jais points a finger and says that deceiving is actually a nice way of putting what Orion is doing. He decides to make a very bold declaration right there in the hall. He mocks Orion's rank, saying a coward like him would be turned into charcoal the moment he stepped into a high-level area like the scorching heat cave. Alice is visible beside them, puffing out her cheeks in pure anger at the disrespect. Alice can't stay quiet and shouts that her master could easily one-shot a dragon. As she imagines Orion effortlessly blasting a monster away, Orion can't help but feel that her expectations of him are getting a bit too high. Jais is making a scene, yelling about how ridiculous the situation is. Over at a nearby table, Orion watches the outburst, thinking about how Jais can't seem to wrap his head around why a genius mage like Alice would ever choose to be his disciple. Jais keeps going, getting more aggressive as he looks down at Alice. He says he can't stand people who act like they're a big deal when they don't have any actual talent to back it up. Alice has finally had enough and snaps back at him. She screams that she's the one who asked to be Orion's disciple because she actually likes him, and tells Jais to stop running his mouth about a man he doesn't even know. Jais just stares down at her with a cold, annoyed look. He clearly doesn't care about what she has to say and isn't taking her seriously at all. Before she can say anything else, Jais suddenly reaches out and snatches Alice by the arm. The move catches her completely off guard, and she lets out a startled cry as he grips her tightly. Jais starts pulling her along, telling her she needs to ditch Orion and become his disciple instead. He starts bragging about his own skills, mentioning that he's a triple spell caster to try and impress her. He continues to drag her away, insisting they go find somewhere to talk so he can show off his magic knowledge. Alice struggles against his grip, telling him that he's hurting her and demanding that he let her go right now. Just as Jais thinks he's getting away with it, a hand slams down onto his shoulder. The grip is heavy enough to make Jais stop in his tracks. Orion steps in and physically blocks Jais from going any further. He stands between the two of them with a dark look on his face, finally losing his patience with the B-rank adventurer's behavior. Jais turns around, looking completely offended that an unranked nobody would dare touch him. He glares at Orion and asks what he thinks he's doing. Orion looks Jais right in the eyes and tells him that Alice is obviously hating this. He follows up by suggesting it's about time for Jais to stop acting so forceful. Jais just gives a smug grin, completely unfazed. He mocks Orion, asking if an unranked nobody is seriously trying to pick a fight with him. Orion doesn't flinch and keeps a sharp gaze on Jais. He says if that's the way it's going to be, he's ready to take things further. Jais looks annoyed and scratches his head, clearly finding Orion to be a nuisance. He looks down on him with a sneer, warning the unranked guy not to underestimate him. Orion officially throws down the gauntlet and declares they're having a duel. He points a finger up and promises to beat Jais into the ground in front of a whole audience, so he finally regrets what he's done. Walking over to the counter, Orion leaves the receptionist looking totally shocked. He tells her that's just how it is and asks her to get the paperwork started for the duel. The receptionist looks at him with a worried face, barely able to believe it. She asks if he's actually serious about fighting a B-rank adventurer. She tries to talk some sense into him, pointing out that the power gap between him and Jais is massive. She warns him that he'll get taken out in a heartbeat, while Jais stands nearby looking proud of himself. Alice is standing there looking super anxious about the whole thing. She looks up at Orion, clearly worried about what's going to happen to her master. Orion reaches out and gives Alice a reassuring pat on the head. He tells her that under the circumstances, backing down isn't an option for him. Jais looks down with a smug grin as the two of them step into the center of the guild's arena. They face each other, ready to settle things in front of the crowd. Alice looks up at Orion with a determined face and tells her master that he absolutely has to win this fight. Orion gives Alice another pat on the head and smiles, saying that he definitely can't afford to lose this one. Watching them from a distance, Jais gets irritated and curses under his breath. Jais's face darkens with anger as he watches them, telling them to stop showing off right in front of him. The signal finally rings out and the match officially begins. Jais readies his staff and tells Orion he's going to show him the massive gap in their power. He starts his incantation, calling for Orion to become the foundation for his flames. Jais tells Orion to die as he fires off a massive fireball that streaks across the arena. Orion stands his ground and watches the attack come in. He notes that while it's fast, the mana is orange and the chant is actually pretty messy compared to Alice's magic. Orion holds up a hand and simply says the word protect to block the spell. He realizes that since Jais didn't use much mana, the power is weak, and the whole attack is way below Alice's level. Everyone in the crowd is completely stunned, watching the arena with wide eyes. Jais looks like he's seen a ghost sweating buckets as he stares at Orion. Jais tries to keep it together with a twitchy, nervous grin, but he's clearly shaken. He asks Orion what kind of trick he just pulled. Jais points a finger and starts yelling, trying to regain his confidence. He shouts that Orion is only unranked because he's too pathetic to even handle basic magic. Orion just stands there behind his barrier with a blank expression, which only makes Jais more furious. Jais asks why he's using magic like it's nothing and tells him to lose the attitude. Orion gives a smug little smile and casually mentions that he still hasn't mastered chant-based magic yet. Jais loses his mind at the comment, telling Orion to stop messing with him. Jais has had enough of the disrespect and says that Orion's trash-talking ends right now. He leans in, ready to dump everything he has into one final move. 3 massive magic circles appear around Jais as he begins a high-level incantation. He calls out to the fire spirits, demanding they turn into hellfire to incinerate his opponent. With a crazed look in his eye, Jai says he's finally going to show off his absolute best spell. Jai screams out the name of his flare spell as a massive explosion of fire erupts toward Orion. Even with the giant fireball coming straight for him, Orion doesn't blink and just quietly says the word protect. The people watching from the sidelines are absolutely terrified, looking on in total shock at the massive power being thrown around. Orion stands his ground as the massive wall of fire crashes into his barrier. Alice watches from the side, looking completely floored by how easily he's holding back such a huge attack. As the smoke starts to clear, Jai stares at the scene in silence. The barrier is still standing tall, though it's got a few cracks from the impact. Jai is sweating like crazy now, staring at the magic with wide, shaky eyes. He can't believe what he's seeing and realizes Orion must have activated multiple spells at the same time. Jai thinks to himself that being able to pull off defensive magic like that usually requires at least double casting, but multiple casting is on a whole different level. Behind the wall, Orion is pretty relaxed, thinking that 2 layers of his protection spell were more than enough. Jai is absolutely losing it, pointing at Orion and calling him a new kind of rank fraud. Orion just stands there with his arms crossed and tells Jai he should probably just head home. Orion keeps his cool and explains that, unfortunately for Jai, he really is unranked. He tells him that if he has a problem with it, he should go complain to the guild instead. Jai screams in total frustration as the pressure of the fight finally snaps his staff right in half. Even with a broken weapon, Jai isn't backing down and grips the pieces tightly. He shouts that he's a B-rank adventurer and tells Orion not to even think about looking down on him. Jai charges forward, swinging the broken halves of his staff like clubs. Orion just stands there with a blank stare, watching the desperate attack come his way. With a crazed look on his face, Jai says he's going to knock that smug expression right off Orion. He starts another chant, calling on the fire spirits to power up his strike. Orion looks up as glowing orbs of mana begin to swirl around him. He thinks to himself that while getting into a close quarters scrap is a bad move for him, he has a plan. He calls out to the emerald mana to get ready. Jai isn't about to let him go and charges forward, shouting that he won't let Orion escape. He starts chanting a fire spell as he closes the distance to strike. Orion keeps his focus entirely on the mana orbs. He gives a simple command for the energy to carry him, and the ground shakes as the spell kicks in. Before Jai can land a hit, Orion suddenly launches straight into the air. Jai is left staring at the empty space where Orion was just standing, looking completely confused. Jai looks up and sees Orion's boots hovering right over his head. He's absolutely losing it, letting out a shout because he can't believe someone is actually flying. Alice is watching from the sidelines, and she's just as shocked as everyone else. She wonders if that's really flight magic, thinking to herself that a spell like that shouldn't even exist in the world today. Still floating high above the ground, Orion reaches out toward the glowing orbs again. This time he calls on the crimson mana to do his bidding. Orion looks down at Jai and tells the mana to burn. A massive explosion of fire erupts from the sky, slamming into the ground right where Jai is standing. Jai can only watch in terror as the flames swallow him up. He's completely freaked out, unable to comprehend the level of power coming at him. The dust and smoke clear a bit as Orion watches from the air. He knows that since he's fighting a high-ranking mage, one big blast probably isn't going to be enough to end the fight. Orion stays focused, looking ready to finish things. He tells himself it's time to see what's next. Jai is clearly feeling the pressure, sweating through a nervous grin. He shouts at Orion, demanding to see how he's going to follow up that last attack. But before Orion can even move, Jai's staff hits the dirt. He realizes he's outmatched and starts to call for a timeout. Jai throws his hands up in total surrender, laughing at himself for getting into this mess. He yells out that he was wrong and officially quits the fight. The announcer stands there in shock for a second before finally calling the match. He shouts to the crowd that Orion is the winner. Alice doesn't waste any time and runs over to Orion, looking totally thrilled. She tells him he was amazing and that he looked incredibly cool out there. She keeps going, talking about how she's never seen anyone pull off high-precision magic or flight like that before. She's convinced he's the greatest mage in the world. In the background, Jai is still on his knees, looking completely drained. Orion just shrugs it off as they walk away, saying he expected this outcome from the start. Alice smiles to herself, thinking about how she ended up showing off her hidden strength. Even though she wasn't planning on it, she says she doesn't regret a thing. Alice mentions that everyone in the arena is still talking about him, but Orion isn't loving the fame. He looks pretty tired of the attention and just asks her to drop it. The guild receptionist is still standing there in total shock. She can't wrap her head around the fact that someone without an official rank managed to take down a veteran like Jai. She feels terrible about how she treated Orion earlier. She bows deeply across the counter, telling him she's embarrassed that her professional eyes missed his true potential after all the years she spent watching adventurers come and go. Orion isn't the type to hold a grudge, though. He gives her a small smile and tells her not to sweat it, explaining that it's easy to get confused since so many people use high-end gear or catalysts to hide their lack of actual skill. His response hits her hard. She looks at him with a heavy blush, completely touched by how generous and forgiving he's being. The receptionist decides to give him some inside information and whispers that they've run into a bit of a supply issue with red dragon scales. While she's talking, Alice starts getting visibly annoyed, grumbling about how the receptionist is suddenly acting way too close to Orion. It turns out the shortage is all because of Daniel and the hero party. They took on a quest to hunt down a fire dragon, but they've been struggling and haven't actually cleared it yet. Hearing that the hero party is the cause of the problem makes Orion lean back and groan in annoyance. Alice looks just as irritated, realizing Daniel is the one holding everything up. Orion decides he's done waiting around. He turns to Alice and casually asks her if the two of them should just go out and take down the dragon themselves since the heroes can't get it done. Alice is caught completely off guard by the suggestion. She lets out a shocked shout, asking if he's actually serious about the two of them hunting a dragon. She tells him that sounds like a total suicide mission. Even the receptionist jumps in to agree, saying that even though she knows he's strong, going after a dragon is on a completely different level of crazy. Orion tries to downplay the danger, explaining that fire dragons are actually pretty simple to deal with because their weaknesses are so obvious. He even suggests that someone like Alice should be able to handle it without too much trouble. Alice just stands there staring at him with a look of pure disbelief. She asks if he's actually being serious about this. Orion keeps the pressure on, saying that if he takes down the dragon by himself, he might finally consider taking her on as a disciple. He quickly laughs it off as a joke, asking if she's planning to quit because she's too scared to go through with it. Instead of backing down, Alice gets a strange look in her eye and says she finally understands what's going on. Orion is left feeling a bit confused by her sudden change in tone. Alice gets incredibly fired up, declaring that this dragon hunt is clearly her final exam to become his student. Orion can only manage a confused sound as he realizes his plan to scare her off backfired completely. Orion starts to sweat as he looks at her determined expression. He can't believe she's actually excited about a suicide mission. Alice is fully committed now, shouting that she's ready to go and calling him master. Orion tries to slow things down, but the guild receptionists are already caught up in the drama. One of them is moved to tears by Orion's tough love teaching style, comparing him to a lion pushing its cub off a cliff, while the other rushes off to process the hunting permit immediately. Orion stands there with his face in his hand, completely exhausted by how quickly the situation escalated. Behind him, Alice is over the moon, proudly holding up her new permit and promising her master that she'll work as hard as she can. Elsewhere, the mood is much heavier. Daniel is speaking to his group, telling them that they are definitely going to finish the dungeon clear today no matter what. Luna and the other girl in the party look absolutely miserable and exhausted. Luna asks if they're really going back in there again, but Daniel doesn't care, telling her that it's the only option they have. Daniel is clearly feeling the pressure as he clutches a magic stone. He tells himself that his party needs to prove they can handle dungeons without Orion's help as soon as possible. He's determined to show his master that they're doing just fine on their own. Deep inside the scorching heat cave, Alice is really feeling the temperature. She mentions how incredibly hot it is, and Orion just casually agrees with her while they walk deeper into the rocky tunnels. Orion decides to do something about the heat. He spots some blue mana floating around and points at it, giving a command for the energy to start circulating around them. The effect is instant, and Alice is completely caught off guard. She looks shocked but happy, saying that it suddenly feels amazingly cool in the cave. Orion acts like it's no big deal, explaining that if they stayed that hot, they'd just get tired and burn out before finishing the job. Alice isn't buying his casual attitude though, telling him to stop acting like it's easy and asking what kind of logic is actually behind a move like that. Orion just gives her a little smirk. He brushes off the question for now, telling her he'll explain how it works some other time. Just then, Orion has a sudden realization that catches him off guard. He starts waving his hands around, wondering why he's naturally assuming Alice is going to be sticking around with him from now on. Alice has no idea what he's panicking about and just looks at him with a confused expression. Moving on, the duo continues their descent. Alice notes that they've already reached the 3rd floor and things are going much smoother than expected. Alice starts using her own magic to help with the exploration. She chants a spell, calling on wind spirits to send out a breeze and scout the area ahead. After the spell does its work, Alice looks back and gives the all clear. She says there aren't any monsters nearby, so they're safe to keep moving for now. Orion asks Alice about the magic she just used to scout the area. She proudly explains that it's called Compressed Incantation Arrow Blaster, and tells him it's a perfect tool for finding where monsters are hiding. Orion repeats the name of the technique to himself, looking pretty stunned. It's clear he's heard of the concept but didn't expect to see it in person. He starts wondering what the logic behind a move like that actually is. Alice notices his confusion and gets ready to break down the magic theory for him. Usually, casting a spell means a mage has to visualize exactly what they want to happen while reciting every single word of the chant perfectly. Compressed incantation is a high-level theory that lets a mage skip all that and shorten the process significantly. Orion scratches his head and admits that he's not really familiar with modern magic theory. Even so, he tells Alice it's an amazing skill to have, which makes her laugh happily. Alice is in a great mood and tells Orion they should keep moving, calling him her master. Orion just smiles and agrees that it's time to head deeper into the cave. As they walk, Orion thinks about how impressive Alice's magic was. He decides that since she showed him something cool, he should return the favor with his own skills. While they navigate through the dark, rocky tunnels, Orion activates his unique vision to scan the environment. He puts out a mental command to search the path ahead. He hopes to find the quickest route down to the next level of the dungeon. However, while he's scanning, something unexpected catches his attention. Orion gets a serious look on his face and stops. He tells Alice that his search picked something up, and turns out they aren't alone because there's another person on this floor with them. Alice is shocked and asks Orion if he can really see that much detail using his abilities. Orion calmly confirms it and mentions there is more to the situation than just seeing the person. Looking ahead, Orion notes that things are actually getting pretty dangerous. He spots a massive swarm of monsters surrounding the group further in, noting there are so many enemies that counting them is a waste of time. Alice is still having a hard time believing he can pick up on all that information. Orion isn't worried though, and tells her that since she's with him, they'll be fine. Orion stops to think and asks her if it's actually a good idea to go jumping into a mess like that on purpose. Alice looks at him, trying to process his concern. Alice gets determined and tells Orion they should keep moving. She makes it clear that she's strong enough to at least look after herself while they're in there. Orion just smiles at her confidence. He tells her he has no intention of being a burden or holding her back either. Orion says he understands, and the two of them continue deeper. The story then jumps back to about 30 minutes earlier on the same floor. Daniel is shouting about how they've already reached the third floor. Even though he looks a bit worse for wear, he brags about how easy the whole thing has been so far. Luna lets out a long sigh, clearly annoyed by his attitude. She warns him to stop being so overconfident since they are entering territory they haven't scouted before. Daniel tells her to stop being so cranky. He laughs it off and says their quick progress just proves that a loser like Orion was never necessary for their party anyway. Daniel is hyped up, shouting about how they are going to finish the dungeon and take down the fire dragon today. Luna watches him and wonders why he's so optimistic, thinking to herself that they only got this far on a first try because Orion was with them before. Luna realizes they've burned through almost all their recovery items, and relying on magic tools without an actual mage is reaching its limit. She suddenly hears a noise and realizes something is coming. A giant rock monster looms over them with a loud crash. Luna yells at the group to be careful as the creature appears. Luna activates a defensive spell called Ground Field to protect the party. Behind the barrier, Emily prepares her bow while looking pretty stressed about the situation. Luna struggles to hold the line, saying that their matchup against a monster like this is terrible. The golem lets out a massive roar that shakes the entire area. Luna screams at Daniel, frustrated that he's rushing in on his own again. Daniel ignores her and charges straight at the massive stone golem with his sword. Daniel gets hit hard and lets out a cry as he's completely overwhelmed by the monster's power. Daniel groans on the floor, saying it hurts and wondering what happened. He doesn't realize it yet, but his foot has accidentally pressed a mechanical switch hidden on the floor. Daniel looks up in a sweat as a huge shadow falls over the group. A loud rumbling starts and everyone looks on in total shock at what's happening. Daniel tries to defend himself, shouting that whatever is happening wasn't his fault. Luna points at him and yells that she doesn't care whose fault it is, he just needs to do something to fix it. Daniel and Luna are both looking pretty rough after the golem's attack, but before they can even regroup, Emily tells them to wait. She sensed something else is wrong. Just then, a massive roar echoes through the cavern. The group realizes that all the noise they've been making is drawing every monster in the area straight to their position. Daniel looks out at the path ahead and can't believe what he's seeing. He asks if this is some kind of sick joke as a massive army of goblins and lizardmen blocks their way, backed up by the giant stone golem. The pressure is too much. Luna looks away, looking completely drained and defeated, while Daniel starts hyperventilating. He's shaking and sweating, totally paralyzed by fear. Daniel finally loses it and collapses to his knees, weakly begging for someone to come help them. He starts screaming for a savior, but Emily just watches him with a look of pure despair, knowing no one is coming. Emily closes her eyes, wondering if this pathetic scene is really how their journey ends. She starts thinking that maybe this is just the natural consequence for everything they've done. In her darkest moment, she thinks of Orion. She pictures his smiling face and the way he always reached out to help, and she wonders what he's even doing right now. The guilt starts hitting her hard. She realizes she spent the whole time just leaning on Orion's strength and never actually did a single thing to help him when it mattered. The lizardmen and goblins lunge forward to finish them off. As the monsters close in, Emily starts desperately praying for a miracle. With tears welling up in her eyes, Emily has one final thought. She wants to make it out of this alive, but more than anything, she wants the chance to find Orion and tell him how sorry she is. Just as the monsters are about to strike, a massive wave of magic hits the area. A voice commands the enemies to be blown away, and a huge explosion clears the entire path in an instant. Daniel is completely frozen, looking like he's seen a ghost. Right below him, Emily's eyes go wide as she stares at the spot where the monsters were just standing. Alice walks into the clearing, praising her master and saying she knew he'd find someone. Orion follows behind her with a sigh, just glad they made it in time to help out. Daniel can't believe his eyes and shouts Orion's name. Orion stays calm though, casually mentioning that his trick only works on weak lower-level monsters. Alice looks at him a bit confused, probably thinking those monsters weren't exactly weak. Emily is totally overwhelmed. She tries to say something, but she's shaking so much that she can only get out a single word. The tears start flowing as she looks at him. She's convinced she must be dreaming because there's no way things would actually work out this perfectly. Orion looks over at the group while Daniel just sits there on the ground, still sounding completely shocked. Daniel finally snaps out of it enough to realize that the person who just saved their lives is the guy they kicked out. Orion walks over and asks Emily what's wrong, seeing how hard she's crying. She's a total mess, sobbing that she really thought she'd never see him ever again. Orion looks down at her and realizes just how bad things must have been. He can tell they were pushed to their absolute breaking point. Seeing the state they're in, Orion asks if they're okay. He offers to take the lid and escort them all back up to the surface since they clearly can't keep going. The tension in the cave is thick as Alice, Orion, and Emily look at Daniel like he's lost his mind. Daniel clenches his fist tight, growling that he's not joking around about their situation. Despite being beaten down and saved by the guy he exiled, Daniel starts yelling and swinging his sword. He insists that they aren't quitting and that they're going to push forward to kill the dragon like they planned. Emily is still a mess, with tears streaming down her face as she looks at him in disbelief. She asks him if he's seriously still talking like this after they almost died. Orion and Alice don't say a word, they just stare Daniel down with eyes that look like they're piercing right through him. Daniel feels the pressure and lets out a frustrated groan, knowing he's backed into a corner. Daniel starts shaking, his finger trembling as he points toward Orion. He's clearly trying to regain some kind of control over the situation and decides to address Orion directly. With a creepy, desperate grin on his face, Daniel tells Orion that he's going to give him the honor of joining their party again. Orion just stands there with a blank stare, looking like he couldn't care less. The entire cave goes silent for a second, with the only reaction being a single, confused sound of disbelief at the sheer audacity of the offer. Daniel doubles down, giving a thumbs up and repeating that he's doing Orion a massive favor by letting him back in. Behind him, Luna and Emily are absolutely stunned, unable to believe Daniel is actually being this delusional. Orion doesn't even look bothered, he just casually picks at his ear like he's bored. He looks around as if he's trying to figure out who Daniel is even talking to. Daniel keeps going, acting like Orion came back because he realized Daniel's magic was too important to lose. Orion doesn't let him finish the thought and immediately tells him that's not it at all. Daniel is looking pretty unhinged, sweating and twitching as he tries to play the hero. He claims that the only reason he's offering to let Orion back in is because he still feels some sympathy for him as a former teammate. Orion isn't buying any of it and looks completely bored. He asks Daniel if he's seriously still trying to push that nonsense, which clearly catches Daniel off guard and makes him look even more pathetic. Just then, Alice steps forward and she looks absolutely furious. She stands her ground with her hands on her hips, looking like she's about to tear into Daniel for his lies. Alice doesn't hold back and points right at Daniel, calling him out for being a total hypocrite. She yells that he's the one who kicked his own master out and left him behind, calling his current offer incredibly selfish. She tells him straight up that he needs to learn some shame for acting like he's doing a favor. The news hits Emily like a ton of bricks. She stands there in total shock, her eyes wide as she tries to process the fact that she's been lied to this whole time. Emily finally finds her voice and tells everyone to hold on for a second. She looks completely devastated as she asks for clarification on whether Daniel actually kicked Orion out of the party. Luna isn't happy either and steps up with a terrifying glare. She demands that Daniel explain himself and tell her exactly what's going on, while Daniel starts sweating bullets now that he's cornered. Daniel starts panicking and can barely get a word out. He stutters and tries to think of a lie to cover his tracks, but he's clearly coming up empty. The girls aren't letting him off the hook. Emily brings up how he told her Orion left the party on his own, while Luna tells him he better start talking. Luna is disgusted that he would keep something that important a secret from the rest of the team. Feeling completely backed into a corner, Daniel finally loses his cool and starts screaming. He yells at them to stop questioning his judgment, and insists that the end result would have been the same no matter what he did. Alice looks away with a look of pure disgust on her face. She tells Daniel that he is absolutely the worst for everything he's done. Luna is actually laughing at how pathetic Daniel looks while he stands there sweating bullets. In the middle of the tension, Emily finally speaks up and brings up Orion. Orion gives Emily a kind smile and tells her not to worry about him. He says he's doing just fine on his own, trying to put her mind at ease. Emily looks relieved for a moment and smiles, saying she's glad to hear that he's okay. Even though things are messy, she seems happy he's doing well. Alice isn't interested in sticking around any longer and points toward their path, telling Orion they should get moving. Orion agrees and gets ready to head out. Before he leaves, Orion casts one last bit of magic on his old teammates. He tells them to take it easy and make sure they get back home safely without overdoing it. Luna stretches her arms and looks totally energized by the spell. She says Orion's support magic is the best there is, and it feels like she's grown wings because her body is so light. As Orion and Alice walk away into the forest, the old party watches them go. Emily calls out a final thank you to Orion, letting him know he really saved them back there. Emily stands there watching his back, feeling a deep sense of regret. She thinks about how much she actually wanted them to keep traveling together as a team. She looks pretty down as they part ways. She realizes there were still so many things she wanted to talk to him about, but now the chance is gone. Emily watches Orion leave, looking like she's about to break down. She realizes there's no way she can ask him to stay after everything that happened. Moving on, Orion and Alice are making some serious progress in the dungeon. They're breezing through the floors and eventually clear all 7 of them without breaking a sweat. They finally reach the end and stand in front of some massive, ornate doors. Orion tells Alice it's time to move, and she asks him if he's actually ready for this. Orion keeps his cool and looks straight ahead. Alice calls him master and tells him to just watch how she handles things, looking more determined than ever. They step into the final chamber at the deepest part of the dungeon. Immediately, the ground shakes as a massive foot stomps down right in front of them. Turns out the big boss is a fire dragon. It's a huge, dark-scaled beast that looks way more dangerous than anything they've faced so far. The dragon opens its mouth and lets out a roar that echoes through the entire chamber, trying to intimidate the 2 of them. The sheer pressure from the dragon's roar is insane, and Alice has to brace herself just to keep from being blown back. Orion starts to tell Alice that if this looks like too much for her, he can help out. Alice looks pretty stressed, but she tells him there's no way she needs him to step in. She insists she's totally fine and tells him to just stay back because she's going to handle this dragon herself. Orion hears her out and hands her a teleport crystal, telling her to use it immediately if things get too dangerous. He asks if she needs any support magic or other items before she starts, but Alice is pretty flustered and insists she's got it under control. Alice thanks him for looking out for her, but she's got her pride on the line. She tells him that since he's actually watching her fight, she can't let herself look pathetic or weak in front of him. She looks him right in the eye and makes him promise that he absolutely won't step in to help, no matter what happens during the fight. Orion just gives in and says he understands. He gets into position to watch her handle it as things finally start to get serious. Alice opens her grimoire and starts a heavy incantation, calling for an ancient fire to bring an end to the world. A bright magic circle starts glowing right above the pages of her book. Orion watches the mana move and realizes this is the first time he's ever seen a spell of this scale being cast in person. A massive, intricate magic circle forms on the ground right beneath Alice's feet. She's putting everything she has into this, and the strain of the mana is starting to show on her face. The fire dragon towers over her, but Alice doesn't back down. The flames from her spell start to surge around the massive beast as she prepares to let loose. This is it, the legendary Quadra spell. It's a level of magic most people never get to see, and Alice is casting it right in the middle of the boss room. The dragon braces itself as the air fills with heat. Alice is fully committed now, and the entire dungeon chamber is about to feel the weight of her power. Orion is completely floored by what he's seeing. He watches the way Alice manipulates the mana and wonders if she's actually controlling it freely enough to create solid magic that mimics a living creature. He starts to sweat a bit, realizing he totally underestimated chant-based magic. He never thought it was possible for it to reach this kind of level. Alice looks back at him while holding her grimoire, surrounded by swirling flames. She asks him what he thinks of it, sounding proud as she explains that this is an original spell she developed herself. She's got a huge grin on her face and tells him that she finds this magic to be incredibly beautiful. The fire dragon lets out a massive roar, feeling the pressure as the spell continues to build up around it. The strain is really starting to hit Alice, and she yells out a command to repair the spell. A magic circle flashes as she forces the mana to hold its shape against the dragon. She's visibly exhausted and breathing heavy, but she refuses to back down, shouting that she can still keep going. Watching her from behind, Orion starts thinking back on all the magic Alice has shown him since they met. To him, her previous spells always felt like perfect, high-quality works of art that were carefully contained and refined. But this magic is different. It feels raw and wild, like she's pouring every bit of her actual life force into the spell to make it work. Orion watches Alice from behind and thinks to himself that if he were in her shoes, he'd just wait for an opening to strike rather than taking the monster on directly. He realizes that's exactly why Alice is so impressive. She's actually willing to go head-to-head against a dragon using nothing but her magic. Alice tries to keep her repair spell going, but the strain is finally hitting her, and she lets out a pained grunt as her strength starts to fail. Orion yells out to her, telling her not to overdo it, but Alice is stubborn and insists she can still keep the fight going. Just then, the fire dragon lets out a deafening roar and starts charging up a massive breath attack. Alice completely freezes up as she sees the glow, and Orion realizes the situation has turned really bad. The dragon fires off a high-intensity beam of heat, unleashed in a massive blast directly at them. Alice looks on in total disbelief, shocked that they're still standing as the heat from the blast fades away. Orion reaches out and grabs her shoulder to get her attention, apologizing to her as he prepares to take over. Alice calls out to him as her master while Orion steps forward into the light, finally ready to handle the dragon himself. Orion steps out in front, looking dead serious as he prepares to take the hit. Alice is right behind him, looking like she's about to lose it because she's so worried about what he's doing. He identifies the energy coming at them as crimson mana, staying calm despite the danger. Right then, the fire dragon opens its maw and lets loose a massive, blinding beam of fire straight at them. Alice screams out for him, totally panicking as the attack closes in, but Orion doesn't even flinch. As the dragon's breath bears down on them, Orion analyzes the situation and figures that since the attack is just mana being manipulated, he should be able to control it himself. He reaches out toward the glowing crimson mana, ready to put his theory to the test. Alice is still freaking out in the background, telling him there's no way this is going to work and begging him to stop. Orion ignores the doubt and puts everything into it, shouting for the energy to just blow away. It actually works, and the massive beam of fire gets completely redirected, curving off to the side instead of hitting them. The whole area lights up with a massive flash from the redirected blast, and Orion just stands there like it's nothing while Alice cowers behind him in total shock. The massive blast from the dragon's own breath hits the wall with a deafening explosion, sending shockwaves through the chamber. The fire dragon looks stunned as its own power is turned against it. Alice is completely losing it, crouching down and covering her ears to shield herself from the impact. Meanwhile, Orion stays perfectly cool, casually dropping his hand after pulling off the impossible redirection. Once the noise dies down, Alice looks up at him with wide eyes, looking totally confused. She asks him what on earth he just did. She struggles to even form a sentence, just stammering while Orion gives her a blank, deadpan look like he's already tired of explaining himself. Orion looks out at the scorched path of the blast and calls it a dragon breath, or at least a cheap imitation of one. Alice freaks out even more, shouting about how he can actually use a monster's signature move. Orion just looks away, scratching his head and admitting he only figured out how to do it about a minute ago. Alice tells him that while his magic has never made sense to her, what he just did is way beyond anything she can understand. Orion tries to keep them focused, saying he'll give her the full explanation later if they actually make it out. He tells her that for now, the priority is taking the dragon down for good. Alice just stares at him in disbelief, looking like her brain has officially short-circuited. Moving on, the smoke clears to reveal the fire dragon is still very much alive and looking more pissed off than ever as it lets out a massive roar. Alice looks at the beast and asks what they're even supposed to do if a hit like that didn't work. Orion doesn't answer, just staring the monster down as the real fight begins. Orion stares down the dragon with a focused look, deciding it's finally time to try something new. He holds out his hand as a mana orb flickers into existence. He looks at the surrounding mana and says they must feel pretty bitter about being used like this. Orion stands in a field of glowing light, telling the mana he's going to prove Alice's magic is actually strong enough to take down a dragon. He calls out to the crimson mana, and the orbs begin to swirl around him. The fire dragon looks up, seeing a massive concentration of energy forming right above it. Alice looks on in total shock, realizing that the magic Orion is gathering is actually her own move. As a giant flaming bird takes shape, Orion admits that his version is just a cheap copy of Alice's magic. He says his imitation doesn't even come close to the beauty of her original spell. Even if it is just a copy, Orion looks determined as he says it's more than enough to get some payback on the beast. Orion commands the magic to go and finish off the dragon once and for all, sending the massive fire bird diving straight into the monster. Alice is blown away, shouting about how the power is on a completely different level even though it's the same spell she uses. She realizes she's finally seeing her master's true strength. Moving on, Orion watches the impact and tells Alice she's wrong. He admits he never could have made that magic happen on his own and says it only worked because she was there. Orion looks on as his copy of Alice's spell hits home. He points out that her magic definitely reached the dragon, feeling confident as the energy swirls around. He thinks about everything he's studied and realizes that according to standard magic theory, hitting this level of power shouldn't even be possible. Orion considers how insane this move is, thinking that anyone who could actually pull off a stunt like this would basically become a living legend. Just then the energy peaks and a massive pillar of light erupts, signaling the activation of a lost spell that completely engulfs the area. Later on, back in the village, word gets around that the dungeon has been cleared. Everyone is ready to celebrate the fact that the fire dragon is finally down. Orion and Alice head to the local tavern to relax. Alice is in high spirits, shouting out a toast as they clink their mugs together to celebrate their big win. Alice is still buzzing from the fight, looking super happy while she talks about the massive amount of loot and materials they managed to strip from the dragon's corpse. Orion asks if those materials will work as catalysts for her magic. He tells her he's actually pretty excited to see what she comes up with for her next research project, and she happily agrees. Moving on, Alice mentions how the receptionist at the guild was completely caught off guard. She asks Orion if he had already stopped by earlier to check on how things were going. It turns out the guild receptionist didn't take them seriously at first, laughing off the idea that they actually killed a dragon. However, she quickly loses her cool and freaks out once she realizes the materials they brought back are the real deal. Back at the guild, the receptionist is completely losing it over the dragon materials. She's stumbling over her words and asking Orion to wait a second while she tries to process everything. Orion just watches her, thinking to himself that her reaction is way over the top for some monster parts. Later at the tavern, the innkeeper brings out a massive spread, setting down enough curry for 3 people. Alice looks totally embarrassed and red-faced, mentioning how she's about to put away 2 whole plates of food right in front of her master. Orion tells her she shouldn't even worry about it. He points out that since her secret identity is already out, there's no point in her trying to act like a refined lady anymore. Alice doesn't take the comment well and snaps at him to shut up, giving him a hard kick under the table. The innkeeper just stands there laughing at the two of them. Alice goes back to pouting while she stuffs her face with curry, and Orion sits there looking a bit rattled by the sudden physical assault on his leg. The innkeeper notices how cheerful Alice is and asks if Orion finally gave in and accepted her as his official student. Alice doesn't say anything, but she's clearly in a great mood, humming to herself while she enjoys her meal. Alice laughs and explains that she hasn't officially become his disciple yet, but she's happy because they walked away with a massive haul of materials from the dungeon. Orion chimes in and agrees that the loot was definitely worth the effort. The innkeeper looks at Orion and asks why he seems so hesitant. He wonders what kind of problem Orion could possibly have with taking on an earnest girl like Alice as a student. Orion just smiles and says he doesn't actually have any complaints about her. The innkeeper suggests that Orion should probably just accept her at this point. He mentions how crazy it looks for a high-ranking adventurer to be begging an unranked stranger to teach her, and says Orion should be the one to end the weirdness by just saying yes. The innkeeper lets out a loud laugh, looking pretty amused by the whole dynamic. He says that when it comes down to it, things like apprenticeships are really just about what the person wants for themselves. He goes on to say that after working in this business for so many years, he's gotten pretty good at reading people. He's confident in his ability to see that there's something special going on with the two of them. Orion keeps eating and mentions that, for the most part, the fact that he's even worried about being a good enough teacher shows he's actually a pretty decent guy. As they sit in the tavern, Orion thinks about how the world is full of shady people who spend all their time trying to scam others out of their hard-earned money. He looks at Alice and tells her straight up that he can guarantee she's someone who can be trusted. Orion just smiles to himself, wondering if that's really how things are between them. Suddenly Alice starts panicking and tells him not to be so easily fooled. She starts yelling at the innkeeper, calling Orion a total dimwit. She brings up how he almost signed away his life as a guarantor for some super sketchy loan papers just the other day. She's completely losing it now, shouting about what a mess he'd be in if she hadn't stepped in to stop him from making such a huge mistake. But then she calms down and gives a little smile, admitting that even if he's a bit hopeless, the innkeeper was right about him being a good person. Orion just scratches his head, looking pretty embarrassed that she's airing out all his dirty laundry like that. Alice finally calls him master and tells him that adventurer ranks are just a formality anyway. She's confident that everyone is going to figure out how great he really is soon enough. Orion looks down, thinking about how the world works. He realizes that people's perspectives, common sense, and the weight of authority aren't things that change just because of one event. He continues reflecting on how people are naturally afraid of things they don't understand. And because of that fear, their first instinct is usually to just push those things away or get rid of them. While Orion is lost in thought, Alice suddenly perks up with a bright idea and calls out to him. She gets a look of pure determination in her eyes and suggests that for their next mission, they should head to a mountain cave and hunt down an ice dragon. Orion is completely floored by the suggestion and can't believe what he's hearing. Alice doesn't seem to notice his shock and keeps going, explaining that she finally figured out what her weakness was during the last fight and promises to win the next one. She tells him she'll handle it solo so he doesn't even have to lift a finger, but Orion immediately shuts that down and tells her there's no way he's letting her do something that reckless. Orion is stunned by her attitude. He really thought the encounter with the orc boss would have left her traumatized, but it turns out she's just incredibly energetic and ready for more. He watches her get all fired up and realizes that if he actually left her to her own devices, she really would be crazy enough to go challenge a dragon all by herself. Trying to change the subject and get things back to reality, Orion looks down at the table and starts to ask her about the whole master situation. Orion looks over at Alice and finally makes the call, asking her if she wants to officially form a party with him. Alice doesn't hesitate for a second, standing up and shouting that she's definitely in, but Orion immediately holds up a finger to stop her. He tells her there's a catch. He starts lecturing her, saying that reckless solo dragon hunting is strictly off-limits from now on. He makes it clear that if she's going to take on something that big, they're doing it together as a team. As the conversation settles, the innkeeper walks over to their table with a sundae in hand. He notices the look on Alice's face and asks her what's going on. Alice tells him that Orion is acting like a total overprotective master, but the innkeeper just laughs it off. He tells them they actually look like a perfect master and student pair. Orion crosses his arms and looks away, feeling a bit annoyed by the comparison. He tells them he's just being normal, because obviously anyone would worry about an acquaintance getting themselves hurt. Seeing an opening, Alice gets all hopeful and asks if he'll just admit it and officially take her in as his student. Orion doesn't miss a beat and tells her that's a completely separate conversation. Alice lets out a little sigh of disappointment, having been shot down on the disciple front once again. Looking down at the empty plates on the table, Orion gets a bit reflective. He thinks about how weird things turned out, especially since he was convinced he'd be a solo adventurer for the rest of his life after his old party kicked him out. He realizes he never thought he'd see the day, especially this early, where he'd actually feel okay with the idea of being in a party again. Alice waves goodbye to Orion, shouting that she'll see him tomorrow. Orion looks back with a small smile and confirms they'll meet up at the workshop. Later on, a pair of boots makes a soft, rhythmic sound as someone walks stealthily through the area. It turns out Luna is lurking nearby, hiding behind the trees and watching the duo with a worried look on her face. Flashing back to a few hours earlier, Luna stands outside a cave entrance, looking completely stressed out about what to do. From nearby, Daniel can be heard losing his mind and cursing Orion's name. Inside, Daniel is having a total meltdown over the rumors that Orion is a high-level mage. He shouts that it's all garbage, insisting Orion is just a rankless dropout, and there's no way he's actually talented. Daniel gets a creepy grin and tells Luna he's meeting someone today to fix the rumors and show everyone the truth. Luna just stares at him, looking like she can't believe how petty he's being. Luna lets out a long sigh, thinking to herself about how pathetic it is for Daniel to hold such a deep grudge over nothing. In the forest, a young girl named Yulia is looking around, calling out and asking where her big sister Alice is. Daniel approaches the girl, welcoming her and saying he's been waiting. Yulia looks up at him and asks if he's the Daniel she was looking for. While Yulia keeps looking around for her sister, Daniel drops a bombshell. He tells her the truth, that Alice isn't actually a member of the hero party at all. Yulia is completely caught off guard by the news and lets out a shocked gasp. She grabs onto Daniel's gear, sounding pretty upset as she asks if he tricked her. She explains that the only reason she even showed up was because she thought she'd be joining a party with her sister Alice. Daniel starts to panic, sweating as he tells her that this whole situation is a surprise to him too. He tries to calm her down, begging her to just listen to him for a second. Trying to pivot the conversation, Daniel asks Yulia if it's true that Alice was her senior back when they were at the Magic Academy together. Yulia starts thinking back to their school days. She mentions how Alice was basically a legend who graduated at the top of her class. Yet she was still nice enough to reach out and talk to a dropout like Yulia. Suddenly, Yulia's eyes light up with excitement as she realizes something. She looks up at Daniel with stars in her eyes and asks if he wants to hear the full story of how she and her sister first met. Daniel looks like he wants to be anywhere else but there. He laughs awkwardly and tells her he'll pass on the trip down memory lane. Watching from a distance, Luna can see that Daniel is clearly losing his patience and finds the whole thing to be a total drag. Meanwhile, Yulia is in the background, completely ignoring his vibes and rambling on about her sister anyway. Yulia holds up a finger to make her point, diving straight into her story and ignoring Daniel's attempt to shut it down. Daniel leans in close to Yulia, whispering that there's actually a specific reason why her sister isn't part of the hero's party right now. Yulia listens intently, looking pretty confused by the sudden secret. Moving on, Daniel starts feeding her a total fabrication, claiming that Alice is being manipulated by a low-life mage named Orion. He tells her Alice was supposed to be working with the heroes, but she's been tricked into basically begging to be Orion's student. Luna is watching the whole thing from behind a wall, looking completely disgusted by Daniel's behavior. The idea of her legendary sister serving as an apprentice to some random guy hits Yulia hard. She starts shaking, thinking that whoever is responsible for this must have no fear of the gods at all. Daniel admits that he knows exactly how terrifying Alice can be when she's serious. He looks pretty drained just talking about her, while Alice stands stoically in his mind's eye. He keeps the act going, telling Yulia that Orion is such a dangerous scammer that he even managed to wrap someone like Alice around his little finger. Luna stays hidden, keeping a close eye on the manipulation unfolding. Luna is reaching her breaking point, clutching the stone wall so hard she's shaking. She thinks to herself that Daniel is officially the absolute lowest person she's ever met. Watching from the shadows, Luna is blown away by the sheer amount of lies Daniel is spewing. Meanwhile, Daniel pivots and tells Yulia that since she's an elite mage and close with her sister, he has a special favor to ask her. Daniel explains his real goal is to eventually recruit Alice into the hero's party. To make that happen, he tells Yulia he needs her help to tank Orion's reputation so that nobody in town will trust him anymore. Once Orion is isolated, Daniel figures he can step in and take care of the rest. He tells Yulia that if they just give the guy a little bit of trouble, Orion will fold and show his true colors. He looks her right in the eye and asks if she thinks she can handle doing that for him. Luna can barely believe what she's hearing. She stares out from behind the wall with a totally flat expression, wondering how anyone could fall for such a sloppy, obvious lie. Yulia is totally fired up now, declaring that she's going to expose Orion for the fraud she thinks he is, all for her sister's sake. Watching from the sidelines, Luna is completely floored that the girl actually fell for Daniel's nonsense. To make things worse, Daniel whispers some extra gossip, telling Yulia that Orion and Alice have been spending a lot of time alone together lately, locked away in an alchemy workshop for their research. Yulia loses it at the thought of them being isolated like that. She's overwhelmed by jealousy and decides she isn't waiting around. She thinks the whole situation is unfair and says she's going to charge in there immediately. As Yulia stomps off toward the workshop, Luna is left behind a tree, panicking. She has no idea how to handle this mess or what she's even supposed to do. Luna decides she can't just stay put, so she starts tailing them. She tells herself that if things start looking dangerous or out of hand, she'll have to step in and stop it. The scene shifts to Orion's alchemy workshop, a sturdy-looking building where he and Alice have been working. Inside, Alice is busy helping out and holding a teddy bear. She notices Orion looks a bit preoccupied and asks him what's on his mind. Orion is holding some of the dark materials they've been studying. He brushes her off at first, telling her it's nothing and he's just thinking. But then he reconsiders. He thinks to himself that it's probably time he actually explained how his magic works to her. When he brings it up, Alice is totally taken aback and asks if he's actually being serious. Looking down at the materials in his hand, Orion figures that if they're going to keep working together, she deserves to know the truth. He figures that once she knows his secret, she'll realize there's no point in being his student anymore and will probably just leave. Orion mentions that he really should have shared his secret with her much sooner. Alice is just happy to hear it, saying she's actually really excited to finally find out the secret behind his magic. Their conversation gets cut short by a loud knocking at the workshop door. Both of them turn toward the entrance, and Orion asks who could be visiting. Orion opens the door to find Yulia standing there. She looks pretty intense as she explains she heard a guy named Orion was staying at this place. Orion raises a hand to acknowledge her, calmly confirming that he's the one she's looking for. The second he confirms it, Yulia points her finger right at him and loses it. She calls him the root of all evil and tells him he'd better be prepared for what's coming. Orion is completely baffled by the kid's energy, but Yulia doesn't slow down. She gets right in his face, vowing to peel off his disguise and rescue Alice from him no matter what. Alice peeks out from behind Orion, looking totally confused by the scene. Orion puts two and two together and figures this girl must be a friend or relative of Alice's. Instead of getting defensive, Orion just smiles and invites her in, asking if she wants to come inside the workshop for a bit. Yulia gets even more flustered by how relaxed he is. She asks if he's just trying to act cool and tells him to stop making fun of her. She stands there quietly for a second, but then huffs and stomps her way into the workshop anyway. Orion looks pretty annoyed with his arms crossed, asking Alice who this girl is supposed to be. Alice is just as caught off guard by the sudden visitor. Before anyone can react, Yulia lunges forward and shouts for her sister. Alice is completely shocked to see her appearing out of nowhere like this. Yulia pins Alice in a massive hug, happily shouting about finding her sister. Alice is so overwhelmed by the sudden squeeze that she can't even get a full word out. Alice starts freaking out and tells Yulia to get off her, especially since they're right in front of Orion. Orion just stands there in the background, looking totally drained by the drama. Alice finally manages to compose herself and clears her throat. She tells Orion she'll handle the introductions while Yulia just stands there looking grumpy. Yulia isn't hiding her feelings at all, pouting and looking away like she'd rather be anywhere else. Yulia complains to Alice that she shouldn't even bother introducing herself to a guy like Orion. This makes Alice snap, calling her a dummy and scolding her for being so disrespectful right in front of her master. The two of them start bickering back and forth, leaving Orion standing there awkwardly. He eventually sighs and tells Alice to just hurry up and introduce the girl so they can move on. Alice sighs and points to Yulia, explaining that this noisy kid is a girl she knew back at the Magic Academy. She goes on to explain that Yulia was actually her junior at school and that her specialty was catalyst preparation. Yulia points her finger right at Orion and shouts that her sister is being completely tricked by him. Alice stands behind her, looking totally stunned by the sudden accusation. Orion just sighs and holds his tea, thinking to himself about how he's been getting dragged into these kinds of annoying misunderstandings way too often lately. Yulia tells Alice she needs to wake up and see the truth. She claims she heard a rumor about what kind of guy Orion really is. Yulia yells that Orion is just trying to be a leech and live off Alice. The claim is so ridiculous that Orion loses it and spits his tea everywhere in shock. While Orion is in the background coughing and choking on his drink, Alice looks horrified. She asks Yulia where she even learned a trashy word like leech. Alice quickly covers Yulia's mouth to stop the nonsense and apologizes to Orion, explaining that the kid is stubborn and stops listening once she gets an idea in her head. Orion just watches them and notes that she actually acts a lot like Alice does. Yulia continues to struggle, making muffled noises as Alice keeps her hand firmly clamped over the girl's mouth to keep her quiet. Yulia finally gets a word in and looks intensely determined, saying that since things have turned out this way, she has a new plan. She grabs Alice's hand and announces that she's going to join Orion's party as well, which catches Alice completely off guard. Yulia explains her logic, saying she'll join up so she can expose Orion as a fraud and eventually take Alice back to the guild. Orion just stands there looking totally confused by the whole situation. Yulia isn't having any of Alice's selfishness and tells her sister that she needs to snap out of it and wake up to reality. The two sisters start scuffling in a cloud of dust, and Orion can only watch from the side while feeling the stress of the situation. Orion takes a sip of his tea and thinks about how Yulia mentioned he was wearing a mask, though he has no idea what she's actually talking about. He looks over at some supplies and realizes that since Yulia is a specialist in catalyst compounding, she would actually be a huge help for the research they're doing. While Yulia keeps messing with Alice, Orion wonders if the girl would even be willing to help them out in the first place. He keeps sipping his tea and figures that if Yulia's goal is to eventually drag Alice back to the guild, her joining the party is actually a pretty convenient setup for him. Orion stands among his research equipment and admits to himself that his own plans usually tank anyway. Alice then turns to him and asks for his final decision on the matter. Yulia acts all smug and tells Orion that it would be a reckless mistake to let someone like her join, since she claims she can see right through any lies he tells. Alice just looks exhausted by her sister's attitude and tells Yulia that she's about to see Orion's true nature. Alice ends the debate by grabbing Yulia's cheek and flatly telling her that she's joining the party whether she likes it or not. Orion keeps his cool and tells everyone that he doesn't really mind the current situation. Alice completely loses it and lets out a massive shout of disbelief, while Yulia just stands there looking shocked by the sudden noise. Yulia starts radiating a dark energy and gets a really intense look on her face, asking if they're just making fun of her. She tells them they better be ready for whatever happens next. Orion looks pretty awkward while Alice sulks in the background. She's annoyed because Orion accepted Yulia so fast when it took her way longer to get on his good side. The group eventually heads over to Orion's alchemy workshop, a quiet little stone building hidden away in the woods. Inside the workshop, Alice starts feeling a bit hesitant and asks if it's actually okay for them to be there. She's worried about hearing the secrets behind how his magic works. Yulia is back to being super clingy with her sister, but Alice is stuck in her own head. She admits that it feels weird to hear his secrets since she isn't even officially his student yet. Orion watches the way Alice handles herself and realizes just how serious and honest she is about everything. Orion tells the girls straight up that even he doesn't fully get how his magic functions, so they shouldn't expect too much. Alice sits on the bed with Yulia and asks one more time if he's sure about sharing this stuff with them. The second Orion gives the green light, Alice's eyes start sparkling with excitement. She's clearly dying to hear whatever he has to say. Yulia snaps at her sister for being rude, but Alice doesn't back down. She argues that getting a lesson from some unranked guy who's probably a fake won't do them any good at all. Yulia pouts and insists that she wants to be part of this too. Alice just yells back, clearly getting worked up by her sister's stubbornness. Suddenly, Alice does a total 180 and gets super excited. She tells Yulia they should actually listen to his valuable lecture and even suggests they become his disciples together. Alice is practically glowing with hype, while Yulia just gives her a deadpan look. Yulia flat out refuses, saying she hates that idea. As the sisters start bickering and pushing each other around, Orion stands there awkwardly, asking if he can actually get the lesson started. Orion begins the lecture by going over the basics. He explains that usually magic works by having an affinity for an element and using a chant to create a physical effect, like lighting a fire when you're cold. He asks them if that's how they've always understood it. Alice raises her hand and agrees, but she makes sure to point out that Orion is the only exception to that rule. Yulia looks completely lost and asks what he's even talking about. She wonders if he's actually trying to say there's a whole different method for using magic. Alice just looks at him, waiting for his move. Alice asks him to show them that move he does. Orion rubs the back of his head and admits that doing it feels pretty embarrassing for him. Despite being embarrassed, Orion gets into position. He recites a chant about fire striking down enemies while shaping his hand like a gun. Orion strikes a pose in the middle of the workshop while the girls watch him closely. He looks serious as he gets ready to demonstrate his unique magic style. Yulia watches Orion closely and points out that nothing happened. She isn't surprised at all, saying it makes sense since he's unranked and probably can't use magic. Just as she says that, Orion calls for crimson mana and tells it to fire. A ball of flames instantly appears in front of him, leaving Yulia completely stunned. Alice is super hyped and asks Yulia if she saw that. She starts bragging about how that's the true power of her master, while Yulia just stands there in shock. Yulia quickly recovers and starts yelling again. She tells Orion not to act so tough just because he made a tiny little fire bullet. Orion tries to defend himself, saying he wasn't even trying to brag. Determined to prove a point, Yulia steps up and says if he wants to be her sister's teacher, he needs to be on her level. She recites a chant to strike down enemies and creates her own flame. Yulia acts all smug and claims her magic is the result of her superior imagination. Orion walks over to take a closer look at the fire she conjured, while Alice looks totally exhausted by the bickering. Yulia asks Orion if he's finally realized he's not worthy of being around her sister. Orion gets a bit awkward and admits that he never really felt like he was worthy in the first place. The mood gets a bit more serious. Alice looks at Orion with a surprised expression when he doesn't push back against her sister's insults. Orion looks down, his face shadowed, and starts to address Alice directly. He seems like he's finally ready to be honest about how his magic works. Orion points toward the flames and drops the big secret. He explains to the girls that the reason his magic is different is because he can actually see the mana itself. Alice and Yulia just stand there with blank faces, completely stunned by what they just heard. Orion starts sweating, realizing he finally let his biggest secret slip out loud. Orion thinks back to when he was a kid. Back then, Daniel used to point and laugh at him, calling him a liar in front of everyone while Emily tried to make him stop. Even random people on the street would yell at Orion because he'd get so distracted by the mana he saw that he'd almost walk right into them. He remembers how lonely it was being the weird kid. People in town would always gossip behind his back, saying he was a space cadet who never paid attention to anything going on around him. Standing there in the present, Orion thinks about how crazy he must look to everyone else. To a normal person, he's just someone talking about things that don't exist. Alice breaks the silence by repeating his words, asking if he's serious about being able to see mana. She looks like she's trying to wrap her head around the whole idea. Orion notices how calm she's being and mentions that she doesn't seem that shocked. Alice puts a hand to her face and admits that she's actually totally losing it, she's just not showing it on the outside. Yulia, on the other hand, is not calm at all. She starts yelling that she can't believe such a crazy story, but then she pauses. She realizes that if Orion is telling the truth, it's the only thing that explains how her sister got so good at magic so fast. Yulia's brain is basically short-circuiting at this point. Orion gives her a weak smile and says it's fine, since her reaction is exactly what he expects whenever he tells someone the truth. Orion focuses his eyes on the fireball Yulia created earlier. To him, it's not just a flame. He can see the specific structure, noting how emerald-colored mana is woven into the core of the red and orange energy. Orion crosses his arms and gives Yulia some credit. He tells her that the way she arranges her mana is actually really impressive, showing he's not just talking trash. Yulia huffs and looks pretty annoyed, asking Orion if he really thinks he can just look at her magic and understand how it works. Orion doesn't just talk the talk, he holds out his hand and starts manipulating the mana orbs. He mentions that he needs to increase the green mana a bit more and then calls for the crimson mana to join in. With a simple command to fire, Orion lets the spell loose. A massive explosion of flames erupts right in front of them, completely filling the room with heat and light. Yulia gets blown back by the sheer force of it, looking totally terrified. She screams that his fireball is way bigger than hers and says there's no way this is actually happening. Alice looks over at her sister with a smug, proud expression and asks if she saw that. She tells Yulia that Orion can copy any mana he sees, while Yulia just sits in the background looking completely soul-crushed. Alice is on a roll now, shouting that while things have been crazy for a while, everything finally makes sense to her now that she knows his secret. Yulia starts flailing her arms around, losing her mind over how unfair it is. She yells that it's basically a total scam and shouldn't be possible. Alice puts her hands on her hips and tells Yulia she better knock it off before she gets actually angry. Yulia tries to argue back, saying that the whole situation is just nonsense that shouldn't exist. Alice doesn't care about the logic, she looks super inspired and sparkly. She shouts that being able to do the impossible is exactly what makes Orion so special. Yulia is left standing there looking completely dazed. She can only quietly repeat Alice's words about him being the one who makes the impossible happen. Yulia is staring at Orion with total stars in her eyes, already calling him her master. Orion holds up a hand, looking pretty overwhelmed by the sudden worship, and tells her to slow down a bit because this is getting out of hand. Alice steps in to keep things moving, reminding Yulia that she actually has a noble mission to bring Alice back home. Orion just watches the two of them with a tired look on his face as Alice clears her throat and suggests they finally get back to the main topic. Alice composes herself and agrees that they should stay focused. She turns to Orion and asks a question that's clearly been on her mind, wanting to know exactly what the mana looks like through his eyes. Orion starts explaining, pointing out into the air where he sees things they can't. He says that even right now, mana is just flying around everywhere energetically, appearing to him as nothing more than individual spheres of light. As Alice and Yulia listen closely, Orion stops to think for a second. He admits that trying to describe the way he sees the world to anyone else is actually a lot harder than it sounds. Alice says it's a sight she can't even begin to imagine. She asks if he's really saying that his entire field of vision is constantly filled with these mysterious orbs shining in the 6 colors of the elements. Orion quickly corrects her, casually mentioning that it's not actually 6 colors. Alice completely loses her cool and shouts, demanding to know how it's possible that the mana isn't following the 6-element rule. Orion explains that this is exactly why he failed so hard with modern magic textbooks back in the day. He tells her that since the mana he sees doesn't fit into just 6 categories, none of the lessons based on that idea ever made any sense to him. Alice looks like she's finally connecting the dots. She asks if his unique way of seeing mana is the secret behind how he's able to use chantless magic so easily.